across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for watching Talk Drive, or maybe you're listening to it, whether you're on the smart speaker, whether you're watching on YouTube or your connected device. You're one of the 74% of home householders who has a connected TV. You're very, very welcome to the programme. There's loads to discuss today, including whether Brexit has been betrayed. We're getting into that. There's an EU reset deal. We'll get all the details. I can see a lot in it. I've been watching and listening and reading about it all afternoon, and I can see a lot that's in it for the EU. What I can't see is what is in it for us. Where are the benefits for Britain? And we're going to get into all of that with Theo Usherwood and Isabel Oakeshott in just a second. Really interesting story over the weekend. Peter Tatchel, the human rights campaigner, he went on the pro-Palestinian march at the weekend. He was standing up for a Palestinian who stood up to Hamas and was murdered by Hamas for his efforts. And then Peter Tatchel was arrested for holding a placard commemorating, memorialising and standing up for this man. What on earth was the reason for that? Why did it happen? And what does the Palestinian Solidarity Committee have to say about that? We'll talk about Gary Lineker, of course, as time goes on a little bit later on. We'll talk about the sport. We'll talk about Joe Biden as well, being not just his prostate cancer diagnosis, but also a big and important book that is out tomorrow by a very respected journalist called Jake Tapper, CNN anchor, who says that, called Original Sin, who says that an awful lot of people covered up the fact that Joe Biden was very, very unwell and cognitively in serious difficulty. We'll go to Israel to talk about what's happening in Gaza as well, and we'll talk about prisoners possibly filling potholes and cleaning bins under new government plans. Do you think that's a good idea? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. You know me, this is my show, but it's your show too, and I want to make sure that as many viewers and listeners to Talk get their voice heard today. So give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word Talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember the main number does three things. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, you can send me a WhatsApp voice message, less than a minute please, and then Tech Up Dave will play them on the air, or you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 7 here on Talk Drive. And if you're wondering where Jeremy is, he's off on holiday for 2 weeks, so I'm here Monday to Friday for 2 weeks. The weekend shows stay too, so I'm on day 4 of a 17-day work marathon. Yes, really, it'll pay for my holiday anyway, which is good. Listen, loads to discuss, including where we are with the EU deal. Theo Usherwood is with me in the studio, political commentator. And Theo, you've been down at Lancaster House today, you've been covering this, you went to the press conference. There's loads in this, but what's in it for Britain?
Not a huge amount. So let's look at the mainstay of this, the central plank of this agreement, which is around speeding up our exports of food and agricultural goods to the European Union. By the government's own admission, it's only going to account for £9 billion a year by 2040. That's like
0.3% of what the country makes. It's really not very much at all, is it?
We haven't, and then of course we've had to, the original, when we went into these negotiations, we were talking about fishing rights. We were hoping our side of the bargain we'd give away 4 years of a deal with the European Union. The European Union got 12 years. Yeah. So it's pretty obvious who's won that one. Look at e-gates. This was supposed to be, another main part of the big win.
So this is people going through with passports, going through airports a little bit faster because they can use the European e-gates.
And the argument, this is supposed to be a consumer-facing policy, right?
I liked being in the other queue.
Did you?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was good with my blue passport.
Well, let's suppose, the calculation is, Peter, there's a group of people out there in the country who don't enjoy sitting in the queue, and they'd rather go through the e-gate so they can get to their holiday quicker. And the first thing to say is European Union countries can already let us through their e-gates if they wish to. They don't have to keep us in. They don't have to keep us in. That longer queue for non-EU citizens. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is they can still refuse us under this guidance, which has been issued by the European Union. So what's the point of it? So all they're being told by the European Union is, if you want to let British tourists use e-gates, then you can do. it doesn't amount to much. And then the big, what we really wanted was we wanted access for our defence firms to get hold of, be able to apply for that 150 billion euro defence fund, to supply and build and supply weapons, manufacture weapons to be fought on the front line against Russia in the conflict with Ukraine. But we're only going to the second phase. Ursula von der Leyen said, yes, this is a great defence pact, but there's a second phase where we're going to actually decide that. And so there may have to be more concessions before we get to that. And then the youth mobility scheme. We don't know the age groups. The age group that's going to be included, 18, is it 18 to 30-year-olds? Is it 18 to 35-year-olds? How long are they going to be able to come and work in this country? Will they be able to bring their dependents? None of these things have been ironed out as part of this agreement today.
I want to go to Isabel Oakeshott in just a second, but there's some breaking news here on Talk, and that is that a 34-year-old man has been arrested in Chelsea in West London. He's become the third person detained as part of an investigation into arson attacks at those properties linked to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, his family home, his car and so on. That's according to the Metropolitan Police. That is the breaking news, that a 34-year-old man has been arrested in Chelsea in West London. He's now the third person detained as part of the investigation into arson attacks at properties linked to Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. That's according to the Metropolitan Police. If there are any developments on that, if we get any more information between now and 7 o'clock, of course we will bring it straight to you. I want to go to Isabel Oakeshott. Isabel, you're very welcome to the programme. We're told that these negotiators had a Nando's last night. So my question is, what's cheekier, the Nando's or this deal?
Nando's might be about as fancy a meal out as any of us can afford if this all goes ahead. I mean, Starmer, I thought, made himself a hostage, or as he might say, a sausage to fortune.
See what we did there? But the sausage wars are over. It's all fine.
Well, he told us that it's going to make our supermarket shop cheaper. That's what he said. I can pretty much guarantee that no one's supermarket shop is going to get any cheaper anytime soon, and certainly not as a result of this deal. And I think there'll be something like 17.4 million Brexiteers who will be holding him to account on that. What's happened today is, on the face of it, quite astonishing. As Theo said, there's still very little detail on one of the most toxic things in this deal, which is the effectively the return of free movement of people, as long as they're people that are considered young, which may be under 35 or maybe under 30.
Although we're told it's only for a few years and it's a mobility scheme so they can come and get a bit of work experience or work in a bar or something.
Let's just stop that right there. Because which of us has any confidence in our border authorities to be checking who's coming in and out, who's overstaying? I mean, this is a complete nonsense. It will rely heavily on people voluntarily returning when their visas run out. I have no confidence whatsoever that this will be properly regulated, that the limits on it will be properly enforced. So what Starmer may well have done is open the doors to a whole other wave of immigration, and that is so politically dangerous for him. I mean, setting aside what it means for the country, it's really politically dangerous for him, because he stood up there, didn't he? What was it, only a week ago, 10 days ago, telling us very unconvincingly that he thought that legal migration...
It was this day last week, and it was all going to sort it out, and now he seems to have gone back on that. He also said, it was through the looking glass at that press conference, because he said that we can't allow it to be easier for employers to not pay their fair share. I was thinking, hold on, haven't you just signed a trade deal with India that has allowed them not to pay national insurance and pay the insurance in India? Isabel, I just wonder, if sitting in Reform UK HQ, they're angry about this, of course they are, but presumably they're also rubbing their hands with glee, saying this is Keir Starmer showing his true colours. This is someone who campaigned for a second referendum, and he's capitulated here. There are many people who will ask, what was the point of Brexit, given everything that's been given away today?
Well, I think that if the people at Reform HQ were not so genuinely passionate about making the most of Brexit and actually realising the opportunity that is Brexit, rather than trying to apologise for it and backtrack and effectively say it's all been a big mistake and let's now unravel it, then they might think, well, this is a political opportunity. They might see it through that prism, because in many ways, you could argue that Keir Starmer has just given, if not 17.4 million, because there might be some people that regret Brexit and don't think that they made the right decision. There's still an awful lot of millions of people that would like to see what they voted for actually enacted. And he has just handed potentially all those votes to another party. Now, they might go to the Tories or they might go to Reform. They're certainly not going to the Lib Dems or Labour. But I think that people like Nigel Farage will be genuinely sickened by this. After everything that everybody fought for, to see this so casually unraveled in the guise of this being a new chapter and forget the past, we're all moving on now. It is wrong, and I think there will be hell to pay.
Theo, it's interesting because Keir Starmer, of course, has a huge majority, but there are some within his own party who aren't happy with this.
Yes, it's worth mentioning, of course, there are many Labour Red Wall MPs who are very wary of the threat of reform. It's worth remembering that in 88 of the 99 seats, something like that, where reform came second, they came second in Labour seats. We saw what happened in Runcorn and Helsby. It's worth mentioning also, just in terms of this youth mobility scheme, if it's up to 30, 18 to 30, we're talking about, and not all of them are going to want to come to the UK straight away, but we're talking about a pool of around 80 million people who fit that category, who would be eligible for that youth mobility scheme. In a country like Spain, the latest figures I just dug out from a quick Google search, youth unemployment is at 27%. Keir Starmer has prided himself on saying that he's going to sort the country out by getting young people in this country back off benefits and into work. We've got about 1 million young people in this country who are either not in education, employment or training needs, and the effort to get them into work is going to be a huge effort to do that. And if we end up in a situation, Peter, where actually employers, and it was noticeable to see Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, at the negotiating table at Lancaster House putting the final touches to it, because this is just what the Treasury wants. They've won this battle with, the Home Office, because big business is saying, actually, we want to bring young people in to work in this country, to serve us cups of coffee and so forth. And that's, I think, going to be really problematic going forward if we really want to tackle, this all stitches together, if we want to tackle things like the benefits crisis in this country and getting young people into the workplace in the first instance, because it's from that point they can bounce on to bigger jobs and better things. But if the employers just think, well, actually, we've got a really easy, cheap source of in the labour market because we've got all these young people coming from countries with high unemployment, then they're going to choose that over bringing through young people in this country who really need an opportunity and a kickstart.
It's a very fair point. Isabel, Starmer says Britain is back on the world stage. How do you react to that kind of language?
Well, what I would say is we can translate that as Starmer is back feeling like he's part of the gang in Brussels. That's all that means. We've never left the world stage. We played a leading role, did we not, in the defence of Ukraine. Yep. The idea that we've left the world stage is patently ridiculous, and it's no thanks to him that we are where we are now. What I would just add in terms of how this will go down is that most voters, the vast majority of voters, are not going to be interested in the niceties of animal and veterinary and plant laws and regulations of that sort. They'll only really hear 2 or 3 key themes from this. One will be the free movement of people. However Keir Starmer wants to cast it, what they'll hear, most voters, is, oh, that means more immigration. And they will hear about the sellout of fishing rights. And again, even if they don't much care about fishing because they don't live in a fishing community and they're not fishermen, or as they kept gratingly referring to today, fisherwoman.
Fisher people. Fisher thems.
That 12 years is an absolutely ridiculous length of time to tie us into anything. And as I understand it, there have been clauses inserted by Starmer's team to make it more difficult for Reform, if Reform were to win the next election, and presumably the Tories as well, to unravel any of this. And you only have to watch, and I haven't yet, but I've seen a lot about it, David Attenborough's amazing documentary about the state of the fishing stocks to know that this trawling, bottom trawling industry, which the EU engages so much in, is terrible for our fish stocks.
Isabel, thank you very much indeed. Theo, thank you as well. That's Isabel Oakeshott, our international editor, and Theo Usherwood, the political commentator. Let's just remind ourselves what Keir Starmer has been saying today. He gave a press conference a bit earlier on, and this is how he was sort of selling the deal.
Today we have struck this landmark deal with the EU, a new partnership between an independent Britain and our allies in Europe. This is the first UK-EU summit. It marks a new era in our relationship. And this deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA, all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto about not rejoining the single market, the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement.
Stephen's in Wolverhampton. Stephen's giving me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Stephen, this is a win-win, we're told. What do you think?
I don't know what he's talking about. He's on another planet, that man. He's a complete and utter traitor. He might as well have...
A traitor? That's a very strong word to use, Stephen.
Yes, it is. How can you be win-win when you're just giving all of the fishing rights, for instance, to European countries? There's hardly any stock around the country anyway, so why would you make such a deal? That's just ridiculous. And this person's supposed to be educated in universities, etc., etc. That sounds very stupid to me.
Stephen, is there anything good about this deal that you've heard? Is there any detail that you welcome in any way?
Not a thing. I'm a working man. I work 5 days a week. I pay my taxes, and there's nothing that Labour any time have said that's going to benefit me, my family, or my grandchild, my granddaughter. It's just all for them. That's why I say they're a bunch of traitors.
Okay, Stephen, thank you. It's not the best line, but I think we've got a sort of some sort of idea of what you think there. So I appreciate that. That's Stephen in Wolverhampton there, and I think a lot of people will feel the same way. Maybe you do. 0344 499 1000, or maybe you think Stephen's talking rubbish, or maybe you think I'm talking rubbish. Whatever you think, give us a call. Thank you to the tweeter who says, "Don't forget Starmer said Joe Biden wasn't fine fettle after he met him. More Starmer lies." Angela says, "How can a democratic parliament allow a 12-year fishing agreement destroying lives of those who risk their lives to fish our waters? I can't understand how this is being allowed." Jane's been in touch and says, "Most people cannot afford a holiday. They will never need an e-gate, probably his own MPs. Upset having to wait 5 minutes in a queue." Leslie said, "Is Starmer sitting with Ursula von der Leyen and others enjoying the 4 glasses of champagne at lunch, celebrating the betrayal of democracy?" And Lorraine says, "Starmer is about to realise his dream of returning to the EU. He fought Brexit at every level. He betrayed British democracy by trying to overturn Brexit and the will of the people. There is only one word that can describe this wretched man and wretched party." Lorraine says that is the word traitor. Very, very strong words there. Steph says, "What an absolute mess this is. What negotiations. Two-tier Keir has absolutely shown his communist colours on this one. He has absolutely no will to help this country. He just wants to be part of a greater socialist superstate." And Leslie says, "All these barriers we have with the EU, that Starmer says he got rid of, are the very barriers the EU put in place against the UK purely as punishment for leaving." Peter's in Dorset. He's given me a ring. Peter, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi there.
I can't quite understand. I looked it up as regards things like treason or being a traitor and all that kind of stuff. But basically, how is it not against the law, at least, that after a vote that goes through democratically for a referendum, how one man can take a plane flight across the channel and turn totally upside down? And
it's not just one man, though, Peter, is it? It's the Prime Minister.
Yeah, the Prime Minister. I mean, basically, the behaviour that's going on is done as if it is a dictatorial situation, which we are not in this country, but that is exactly what is happening. And it is quite extraordinary.
He's got a huge mandate, though, Peter. He's got a large majority. He can get this through Parliament, and he's doing what he thinks is right for the country. You don't think it's the right thing. I actually don't think it's the right thing either. But he's saying he wanted a reset with the EU. He wanted to make things better in regard to a trading partner across the Channel. This is what he thinks is the best option.
But how can it be allowed that just because he comes into power with a majority, regardless of whether he becomes in as a majority, how it can be turned upside down, major things such as we had with the Brexit vote, and it can be allowed to get away with it. I mean, these things took so many years to sort out in the first place, and people say, obviously, perhaps it wasn't as good a deal as it should have been in the first place, and maybe at times there could be certain resetting. But basically, he's going back to the point. We're going back to the situation where we're in the EU, apart from actually signing the dotted line, as if we're
in all but name.
We're not in it. And how? Yeah. But how can it be allowed that when such a major vote in a country goes along and is passed, and the next government that come into power can just totally overturn it? And
they would argue, Peter. They would say that we still are out of the customs union. There isn't freedom of movement. They would argue. Some people say the youth mobility scheme is a return to that. I interviewed a Labour MP the other day who basically made those points and said that Brexit still exists. But I suppose your argument, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Peter, but there are quite a number of people who would say this is Brexit in name only, and essentially we may as well be in the EU. Our food export rules, for example, are going to be exactly the same as the EU's rules from now on.
I mean, the fishery situation is a quite extraordinary situation. When you imagine that we are an island, we are completely surrounded by water. We have such rich stocks. We have excellent people and machinery to bring us our fish. And if we were that efficient that we had surplus, we can export it. And it is quite extraordinary that an island is having its fishing industry decimated. It's like a total contradiction in terms.
Okay, Peter, thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate that. That's Peter in Dorset there. We're going to another Peter in a minute, Peter Tatchel, the human rights campaigner, who is well known, and a really interesting story, actually. He went on the pro-Palestinian march at the weekend in London. Now, these marches, of course, some people call them hate marches, some people don't like them. I personally wouldn't go on it, but I defend the right of people to do so. But really interestingly, Peter Tatchel held up a sign accusing Israel of genocide, which I personally don't agree with, but that doesn't matter for the purposes of this conversation. The second part of it referenced a Palestinian man in Gaza who stood up against Hamas terrorists. He was tortured, beaten. He was his corpse was returned to his family as an example of why Hamas believe no one should stand up to them. Peter Tatchel mentioned that on his placard and was arrested. It's a little bit more complicated than that. We're going to take we're going to hear from him and get all the facts and give right a reply to the Palestine Solidarity campaign. They say they didn't report him to the Metropolitan Police. The Metropolitan Police say a report was received. We'll get into all of that. It's a fascinating story, and it says a lot about where we are in this country. Peter Tatchel joins us in just a second here on Talk, and I want your thoughts too on this. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
It's in the Sunday Times this morning. If you look on the front page, passport queues cut in EU deal. Now, I can imagine this being spun out by the Labour government going, oh, look, here we are, this is a benefit of what we're doing. So basically, British holidaymakers could face shorter airport queues this summer with negotiations on the verge of striking an agreement, i.e. you can use the gates. That's the whole idea. What I didn't realise, though, travellers coming from Europe into the UK can use gates, but we can't. No. Why?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Thank you to everybody who's been in touch on the EU reset. Reg says Starmer is currently saying this gives the British public a chance to get what they voted for last year. What did we vote for last year? I'm confused. Well, you voted for Labour, certainly. Well, you didn't, Reg, I would imagine, but millions of people did. And he's democratically the leader of this country. He's the Prime Minister. Some would say, actually, he's doing what he would always wanted to do, which is get closer to the EU. But, of course, the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit may disagree with that. Brad in Cambridge says Starmer has one aim in mind. He's preparing the ground for a place in the EU when he loses his current job. He's already said that he prefers Davos to Parliament, and it worked for his mate Tony, says Brad. Well, listen, we'll get back into that story a little bit later on. It is the main story today. But there's something that a viewer actually sent me over the weekend. They noticed that the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchel was arrested by Metropolitan Police at a protest in London, a pro-Palestinian protest. Now, I think we can put on the screen now, and I'll describe it for people who are listening on the radio, the banner, the placard that Peter Tatchel held up, which is about Odeh al-Rabi, who was 22 years old. He was executed by Hamas. He stood up against Hamas. He protested against Hamas in Gaza, and then was murdered, executed by them for that. He was tortured, and his corpse was given back to his family, sort of dumped at his family to say, "Don't stand up to Hamas." Essentially, at the top of the placard is "Stop Israel Genocide." I personally don't think Israel is guilty of genocide, but that's not the point of this conversation. Just for the moment, I think we can perhaps set that aside for 1 minute. We will return to the Gaza conversation a bit later on. But Peter Tatchel is with me now. And Peter, can you just talk me through what happened on Saturday?
Well, I'm a great supporter of human rights for Palestinians and Israelis. But what is happening in Gaza now is, in my opinion, a war crime and does amount to genocide. But I'm also very conscious that Hamas is a dictatorship. It's sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, and it oppresses Palestinian people. They don't have freedom of speech. They don't have the right to protest. They can't form trade unions. It's a very repressive regime. And in the last 2 months, there's been a wave of anti-Hamas protests throughout Gaza, which have been very savagely repressed by Hamas. And then one by one, they're identifying some of the people who protested and having them executed. And Odeh al-Rabi was one of them. He was at a protest. He was identified by Hamas, and after the protest, they hunted him down and they tortured him for 4 hours, beating his body with metal rods till he died. Then they dragged his body through the streets by a rope and dumped his body outside the family home with a message which said, "This is what happens if you criticize Hamas," intended as a clear intimidation and warning to other Gazans if they dared protested against Hamas's tyranny. It is absolutely shocking that Hamas actually put the beating and torture of al-Rabi online, precisely, of course, as a deterrent to try and intimidate other Gazans. But they were barefaced about what they did. They were quite open, quite upfront.
Just as they were with the 7th of October and some of the things that they did then.
And he's not the only one. There was a case of a father who was executed in front of his son. His son was about 10 or 12 years old. They didn't care. They just shot his father dead right in front of his son. In April, on one day alone, 9 Palestinians were executed by Hamas. No trials, no charges.
So these are people in Gaza who are standing up to Hamas terrorists. They're standing up to this brutal regime there, and they're being killed for what is happening and tortured, as you pointed out.
Yeah, they say clearly they blame Israel for the mass civilian killings, particularly the deaths of 15,000 children. They blame Israel, but they also say this wouldn't have happened if Hamas hadn't provoked Israel by committing the 7th of October terrorist massacre. So they blame Hamas as well, plus they've got lots of other grievances that you can't, there's no freedom of speech, you can't organise unions or fight for your rights in Gaza. It is a dictatorship.
So tell me about the placard you had, what you did. You've joined these protests before. You're a lifelong campaigner. You've been arrested, I think, 103 times. So tell me about what happened on Saturday to you when you went along with your placard to join the pro-Palestinian protests, which have been going on, I think it's every 2 weeks now in London.
Yeah, I've been on every single protest bar one since the 7th of October. And on many occasions previously, I've criticised both Israel and Hamas, and there's never been an issue. So I support the protests, the demand for a ceasefire, the return of the hostages, a negotiated settlement to secure peace and justice for Israelis and Palestinians. This time I want to particularly highlight the mass anti-Hamas protests that have been happening across Gaza, which are virtually unreported, and in particular the killing, the murder, the brutal, savage execution of Odai al-Rubai. It was my intention to support the protest, but to draw attention to Hamas's atrocities. So when I arrived at the start of the protest, I assembled as I did near the front with a Jewish friend of mine, and initially there was no problem. Some people actually said, we're glad you're here, we agree, we don't support Hamas. But then after a while, people began to come up and abuse me, like F off, get out of here, calling me Zionist scum. It was quite threatening, quite intimidating. The police stood by and did nothing.
So the police weren't protecting you from this very straightforward, I mean, you literally have Israel genocide, stop Hamas execution. You were saying, you're supporting the human rights, as you would see it, of the Palestinian people and the Israeli people here. This is really straightforward stuff.
Yeah.
Were there people who were being critical of you who you think are pro-Hamas?
I don't know. I can't tell, but some...
I mean, there are people on those protests who hold up placards like that one in favour of Hamas, Hezbollah and so on. Some people would say, why join those protests when those people are on it?
Well, I've got to say that in all the marches I've been on, I have never seen any pro-Hamas placards or heard any pro-Hamas slogans.
They've been in evidence, Peter. We've seen photos and pictures of them a lot.
There may have been, but they're totally unrepresentative of the vast majority of people on the pro-Palestinian marches. And of course, many Jewish people, like my Jewish friend, were there. And she was openly wearing a Star of David. No one attacked her
But they attacked you for this particular thing, at least verbally. So tell us what happened next.
Well, the march set off, and then we'd only gone about 300 metres when a police liaison officer in a blue vest came up to me and said, told me to step out of the march. And I said, why? And they said, I need to speak to you. I said, well, I'm carrying on marching, what's the problem? And they said, well, some of the Palestinian march stewards have said that you've been shouting Hamas are terrorists. Now,
which is factually true, but you haven't.
I never said that. I didn't shout anything, in fact. But it is pretty outrageous when I said to the police, who are these people? Give me the names. And he refused. And I said, well, look, you're operating on hearsay and gossip and tittle-tattle. You've got no evidence that I actually said that. I'm denying it point blank because it's not true. In a free society, people do have a right to say Hamas are terrorists based on the laws on free speech and the right to protest.
On fact.
And on the issue of fact, Hamas are terrorists, and Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation in this country. So the fact that police would pillory me over that, I found profoundly shocking. They should have been looking for people who perhaps did support Hamas.
Yes, yes.
Then anyway, the officer went away. Then about 10, 20 minutes later, when we were on Westminster Bridge, the same liaison officer came up to me again and accused me of, well, he reiterated the claim that I'd been shouting these Hamas are terrorist slogans, which I hadn't. And then he claimed that I was part of a counter-protest. And I said, I'm not part of a counter-protest, I'm here in the main march. I support the main march as I have for all these years. Now, I've been supporting Palestine human rights for 54 years. So he said, no, you're not. You're part of a counter-protest. We believe you're part of a counter-protest. I said, I don't know of any counter-protest. Where is it? Who's organising it? I've never heard of it, never been to it. I don't support it. He said, well, that's what you say, or some words to those effect. And then he said that the sign you are holding, criticising Hamas and the execution of that young man, this was racially and religiously abrogated breach of the peace.
This is the Metropolitan Police saying this to you.
Yeah. And my placard did not mention anybody's race or religion, and I never would. I was calling out the execution by Hamas of this young man. And as I said, they said that was an offence under breach of the peace. Moreover, they said that you are violating Section 14, which is the police instructions on the designated area of protests. Well, I was in the march. On the march route had been agreed, and it was the designated protest. They said, oh, no, you're part of the counter-protest, and you have to go over the other side of London to go there. I said, I'm not part of the counter-protest. And I was actually in the designated area. But they said, well, if you're in the designated area, why aren't you marching with the main banner, with the lead banner? And I said, OK, if you want me to, I will. But then they wouldn't let me go back and join the main march. So then I tried to walk forward, and they arrested me.
We're going to find out what happened next in just a minute. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're here with Peter Tatchel. He's just brought us up to the point where he's telling us that about being arrested. Peter, pick up the story. Tell us what happened then.
Well, I was handcuffed and marched off by the police. I spent a total of 5 hours and 38 minutes in police detention on the pavement, in a police van, and in the cells at Charing Cross Police Station. I could have been bailed very quickly, which was normal. I'm a peaceful protester. Yep. But the police went through the whole process like I was a serious criminal. I was fingerprinted, DNA sampled, photographed, and stuck in the cells. They claimed in the original interview when I got to the station, they needed to detain me to interview me. because they didn't believe that I would voluntarily return to the police station, which is a nonsense. I've always cooperated with the police. But having claimed they detained me because...
When you have a long track record of cooperating with the police, you've been arrested, not only in this country, you've been arrested over 100 times for your peaceful protest. You've always cooperated with the authorities.
And I felt like the way I was arrested on Saturday reminded me of my arrest in Moscow at the hands of Putin's police, and in Qatar at the hands of the Qatar police. It was the same kind of intransigent, rude and malicious behaviour. Or that's the way it seemed anyway. It seemed malicious.
What is your thought about...
Can I just finish?
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
They claimed they had to keep me in the cells to interview me, but at no time did they ever interview me. As I said, they claimed that they had to detain me because they didn't believe that I could be trusted to return voluntarily to make a statement. So
they just let you go after 5 hours and 38 minutes then?
Well, go under investigation. So they said they had to review all the footage and then decide what charges, if any, to bring.
And have you heard anything since then?
Well, now they announced now that there's no further charges, and the police admit that I was arrested in error.
So completely.
But this is outrageous because it isn't about me. It's about a police attack on the right to peaceful protest and freedom of expression, and this is getting worse and worse under the Met Police in recent years.
I want to read what the Metropolitan Police have told us. Mr. Tatchel was initially detained after concerns were raised with officers by stewards from the Palestine Coalition protest. Officers spoke with him and, believing him to be a counter-protester, directed him to join the counter-protest in its designated area. When he attempted to rejoin the Palestine Coalition protest, he was arrested on suspicion of breaching the conditions in place and to prevent a breach of the peace. While officers were acting in good faith based on the information they had received at the time, we now understand that Mr. Tatchel was legitimately participating in the Palestine Coalition protest and was not in breach of any conditions. He was released from custody at the earliest opportunity once officers realised that an error had been made. He will face no further action. We will review our handling of the incident to fully understand what took place. Is that good enough for you?
Over 5.5 hours is not released at the earliest opportunity. There were people in that station who, I don't know what crimes they committed, but they were released very quickly on bail. I wasn't.
The Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which organised the protest, we asked them, and they said that his spokesman said, I can confirm that the Palestine Solidarity Campaign did not make any complaint to the police about Mr. Tatchel. Now, it could have been another part of that. It could have been another steward or another person who was not affiliated with that particular organisation in theory.
Yeah. I accept that the Palestine Solidarity Campaign officials did not seek to have me arrested, did not make the false allegation that I'd shouted Hamas are terrorists. I suspect it was just a rogue individual steward or several individual stewards who did that, but they were not acting with the official sanction of the campaign. And indeed, that rings true, because in the past I have marched at those Palestine protests with placards critical of Hamas, and the Palestine organisers have never intervened and never admonished me.
So why do you think this has happened now?
I don't know. I think people have this view that if Palestinians are under attack, they should be immune from criticism. And this is not a criticism of the Palestinian people, it's a criticism of Hamas. And I would say to anyone, if you support Palestinian people, you must oppose both Israel's war crimes and the abuses and human rights abuses by Hamas. These are two oppressors. Both Hamas and Israel oppress Palestinians. Oppose them both. Don't be one-sided.
What is your message to the Metropolitan Police in terms of how you personally were dealt with this? They essentially took the word of someone against you. They asked your opinion on it, but then they held you for 5.5 hours, from what I can see, for no reason, and they have said that they realised a mistake had been made. You were telling them from the start that a mistake had been made, and you weren't resisting in any way that was anything other than completely lawful.
I think it's all down to these particular officers, although I find it strange that 7 officers all agreed and conspired together for my arrest on these false charges. But I do not believe they're representative of the Metropolitan Police. However, I do believe that the way in which the Metropolitan Police are policing protests is becoming more and more repressive. You know, the right of freedom of speech and the right to protest is slowly, gradually being eroded.
You're a long-time protester on a number of issues. How have you seen things change? Because freedom of speech, freedom of a load of people contact me in the station all the time, and when we talk about the pro-Palestinian protests, for example, and say, oh, they should just be banned. And my point is, Hamas don't allow free speech, Hamas don't allow freedom of assembly, Hamas don't allow these kind of things to happen. That's the beauty of our democracy. Even if I wholeheartedly disagree with many people on that protest, not everybody, but many people on that protest, the point is that we're allowed to do it. But how have things changed for you over the last few years? How have things become more restrictive?
Well, the way in which the police enforce the law has become harsher and more restrictive. The charges have become more and more severe, and that's not entirely the police's fault. It is down to successive governments that have eroded the laws on the right to protest. So, for example, whatever you think about Just Stop Oil, the idea that you can get 5 or 3 or 4 years jail for a peaceful protest, that's just shocking. That's unbelievable and incomprehensible in a democracy. Even if you don't agree with Just Stop Oil, those sentences are savage. They are not consistent with a democracy. And as I say, this protest that I did, the issue is not about me. I'm making a fuss because I want to defend the right of all people in Britain to have freedom of speech and the right to protest, even if I disagree with them. I didn't agree with Brexit, but I support the right of Brexit people to protest. Yeah. You know, the right to protest is for everyone, and the police should facilitate that, not undermine it.
Peter, fascinating talking to you. I disagree with you on many things. I disagree with a number of things you've said there, but that kind of doesn't matter because there's a bigger issue at stake, and that is freedom of speech. That is freedom of protest. Thank you for coming in today. Are you okay? Are you feeling all right?
Yeah, this is nothing by comparison to what the people of Gaza and Israel have suffered in attacks on civilians. That's just, it's water off a duck's back. And I have been arrested, as I say, 103 times, only one standing conviction. All the cases...
What was your conviction for?
All the cases have been for peaceful protests and have been either dropped by the police eventually or thrown out by the courts.
What were you actually convicted of?
The only standing conviction is for interrupting the Archbishop of Canterbury's Easter sermon in 1998. I was charged under the 1860 Ecclesiastical Courts Jurisdiction Act,
right,
formerly part of the Brawling Act of 1551, which prohibits the interruption of a minister of religion.
Wow.
Now, I was entirely peaceful.
Yeah.
I wasn't...
Were you fined or what happened?
I was not disrespectful to the Archbishop or the Christian religion. I just simply said the Archbishop's support for anti-gay laws that discriminate against gay people, that was not a Christian value, not consistent with love and compassion.
And what was the sentence? What were you?
I could have been fined £5,000 and sent to prison for 6 months. The magistrate accepted that I had behaved well, and he fined me £18.60. His comical reference to the 1860 Act under which I was convicted.
A magistrate with a sense of humour. My goodness, what's next? Peter Tatchel, human rights campaigner, thank you. Fascinating story, and it says an awful lot about where the police are, about our society. Thank you for coming in, Peter. We're going to talk about Gary Lineker next, and be sure to give me your thoughts on what Peter has said as well. 0344 499 1000.
It's in the Sunday Times this morning. If you look on the front page, passport queues cut in EU deal. Now, I can imagine this being spun out by the Labour government going, oh, look, here we are, this is the benefit of what we're doing. So basically, British holidaymakers could face shorter airport queues this summer with negotiations on the verge of striking an agreement, i.e. you can use the gates. That's the whole idea. What I didn't realise, though, travellers coming from Europe into the UK can use gates.
Oh, yes, we can.
But we can't.
No.
Why?
The great EU surrender by the UK is taking place as we speak, and at every level it sounds like a disaster.
Yeah.
My constituents of Boston and Skegness, my fishermen in Boston, will be absolutely spitting mad on the news that it appears that Starmer, in the face of a request from the EU to extend the deal for 4 years, he said, no, that's fine, have 12, why not?
Across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Brian, who says, I'm not a fan of Peter Tatchel. He's a divisive character in my view. However, having listened to what he had to say, he has my full support in this instance, and the actions of the Metropolitan Police and his arrest are nothing short of a disgrace, says Brian. Hear, hear, Brian. Becca says, it's okay for the right to be treated like this, but not for Peter Tatchel. Boo-hoo, no sympathy. Horrible little man, says Becca. Well, Becca, if they do it to Peter Tatchel, they'll do it to you as well. Peter, it's so wrong he was arrested for protesting against Hamas, says Paul. We'll return to that, but I want to talk about Gary Lineker now, because he has gone from the BBC, or will very shortly in a few days. He posted on Instagram why he's leaving.
I've stood up for minorities and humanitarian issues and against all forms of racism all of my life, including, of course, anti-Semitism, which I absolutely abhor. There's no place for it and never should be. So I think it's best for all concerned that I step down from BBC presenting duties altogether and not do next season's FA Cup or World Cup. The final day of the Premier League season on Sunday will be my last show.
Someone who stood up against racism and anti-Semitism his entire life, yet had absolutely nothing to say on the 7th of October when Hamas terrorists butchered, maimed, burned, raped thousands of Israelis. Let's speak to Sally Jones, who's a former BBC presenter. Sally, this had to happen, didn't it?
I was amazed it took so long, and I don't think that he should be presenting the last match of the day this weekend. I think he should have been straight out without his feet touching the ground.
He's sort of leaving on his own terms a bit, isn't he, Sally?
What did you say?
He's sort of leaving on his own terms, really, isn't he?
Well, to far less extent than he would have been had he been doing some of the 2026 FA Cup and World Cup, which he was down to do. So in a way, he's had his hand forced. He realises that he's overstepped the mark. Many of us didn't really believe that he was unaware that a rat emoji would not be deeply, deeply offensive because of its links with, the links with international Jewry and with the with the way the Nazis used
it's a clear anti-Semitic trope. It's a very, very clear thing, and it's something that the vast majority of people, I would argue, are aware of in regard to that. He says he recognises the error and upset caused. It's not quite an apology.
No, it's a sort of, oh, I was a bit silly. I didn't happen to see that emoji, or I didn't realise what it meant. And I think that it beggars belief that he didn't know what it meant. Obviously, we'd all give him the benefit of the doubt, but with a good deal of not really taking it that seriously. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that he's always been very popular. He's an engaging Jack the Lad sports presenter. He's an effective crisps publicist. He's somebody who's a national treasure, and he worked incredibly hard to be the one selected to replace Des Lynam, who in himself had become an absolute national treasure. They're people who are very good at what they do, but Gary Lineker isn't the only one. The BBC has a number of other talented football and sports broadcasters.
Oh, he knows his football back to front, and he's a good presenter. What I don't want him doing is going beyond the remit of being impartial, because that's what the BBC's about. That's what we pay them for. And I know as someone who worked there previously, you wouldn't dream of, when you were a presenter, putting your opinions online or going public on these things. I just wonder how you think the BBC has acted themselves.
I think they've been very mealy-mouthed. I think they were very scared when suddenly, back in 2023, a number of other sports presenters lined up behind him when they were about to discipline him and take him off air for some weeks for, again, another impartiality row over him comparing some of the language around the Tory migrants policy to Nazi Germany. And I think it was a real shock to the BBC that many of his colleagues were prepared to back him, even though many of them would not have dreamt of breaking their clauses of impartiality. I mean, you and I and everybody else, and the very highest profile people from Andrew Neil, Jeremy Paxman, Joe Coburn, everybody has signed up to those impartiality clauses. That's part of what working for the BBC is about. It's not just working for, say, GB News, who have a particular right-wing stance to grind. The BBC is something different. It's our national broadcaster. We are expected to have an extra layer of impartiality. We all have our viewpoints, but what we shouldn't do is put our thumb in the scales and show what our own view. It's like letting our slip show, isn't it, by giving our own points of view. If he wants,
and there are many other places that he can do that if he wants to.
Exactly.
There are many other opportunities. You know, this station, for example, we're encouraged to give our opinions. You mentioned some other broadcasters as well, but the BBC just wasn't that case. Do you think he'll continue to be a successful broadcaster?
I think he may well take the Qatari shilling, which you could say, I mean, he, I believe, already has on several other occasions, broadcasting for them. And of course, it's riches beyond the dreams of Croesus, but you're also rather checking in your morals at the door if you go and work for people like that, given what their human rights record is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, he's got so much money from Goalhanger, from being
the podcast,
one of the main people at Goalhanger Productions, a very, very successful podcast firm. He could virtually wheel away the truckloads
of cash
in a wheelbarrow.
Sally, we'll just have to leave it there. Just the news has beaten us, but that's Sally Jones, who's a former BBC presenter. Really appreciate her. She speaks an awful lot of common sense. We'll continue talking about this after the news. You can tell us your thoughts on it as well. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Monday evening. I'm here this week and next week in for Jeremy Kyle. He's on holiday recharging his batteries, but there's loads to get us going and to power through many stories today, because Peter Tatchel has been with us a few minutes ago. He's been telling us about being arrested by the Metropolitan Police simply for protesting against Hamas. There's been a Labour revolt over Starmer's Brexit betrayal, some people are calling it, the EU reset. We've got a former Labour advisor in the studio who's going to tell us his thoughts on this. Some people ringing up calling Keir Starmer a traitor. I think that's maybe too harsh a line, but what do you think? Maybe I'm wrong. 0344 499 1000. And the big question in all of this, what is actually in it for Britain? This hour as well, we're going to talk about all sorts of things. We're going to speak to someone who backs Gary Lineker and is Jewish. We're going to speak with Michael Yaki. He's a US political analyst because of Joe Biden's diagnosis of aggressive prostate cancer. Also a big book out tomorrow called Original Sin, about how the Joe Biden decline in his cognitive function was covered up by Jill Biden and many senior people in his administration. We were lied to on that consistently. Now there's a new book out about it. We'll get a sports update as well. Lots of people getting in touch. You can too. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a WhatsApp text message. You can send me a WhatsApp voice note, less than a minute please, and then Tech Up Dave will play them out. Or you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Let's spend the next couple of hours together. Loads to talk about here on Talk. Many people getting in touch, including Lorraine, who says Starmer has betrayed the great British electorate, and as a Prime Minister he and his party have completely trounced democracy. Labour have betrayed the farmers, the elderly, waspy women, private schools, employers, council taxpayers, free speech and fair justice. Now he has betrayed the fishermen. He is a traitor, and surely we must have legal grounds to remove a compulsive liar who has failed at every level to act in the interests of the indigenous British electorate. Lorraine, could you send me another text with what you really think, because I'm not sure that's strong enough. Nick in the Communist State of Oxford says, absolutely deflated and devastated about today's Brexit betrayal. I said to friends and family after the referendum we would be betrayed by the establishment and political elites. I prayed for a hard Brexit in 2019, which would have made what Starmer did today virtually impossible. The chaos would then have been worth it. The Tories are complicit in this as well. Labour will never be forgiven. Neil says, interesting to hear what Theo said, Theo Usherwood there, in his overview of the EU deal, particularly when it comes to Brits being able to use the e-gates. He stated that each country will decide whether to comply or not. Would you like to make a bet that the French won't give us access? Before I speak to Matthew Torbett, who is a former Labour advisor, I just want to play the first voice note of Drive today. This is from Jamie.
Just heard Starmer make another cock up in his speeches. It's like the sausages, hostages all over again, because I think he meant to say that it's a landmine deal and not a landmark deal, because it certainly has blown Brexit right out of the British fishing waters. Great show.
Jamie, some superb wordplay there. Really admire that. Good opinion as well. We have heard from Keir Starmer this afternoon. Let's just remind ourselves what he has been saying.
Today we have struck this landmark deal with the EU, a new partnership between an independent Britain and our allies in Europe. This is the first UK-EU summit. It marks a new era in our relationship. And this deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA, all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto about not rejoining the single market, the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement.
Well, Matthew Torbett is a former Labour advisor. He's with me now. Matthew, it's all marvellous, isn't it? It's brilliant. Everything's fantastic and marvellous and wonderful and brilliant and marvellous, and everything's going to be fantastic. And we're not rejoining Brexit. We're not rejoining the EU. Brexit hasn't been eroded in any way, and Keir Starmer is the risen Messiah. I mean, that's basically what I've taken from that. Do you think that's true?
No.
I don't, however, think it's a betrayal. I was just saying to you off air, I was a reluctant Remainer for my cards on the table. I wasn't sort of a second referendumer. I thought it was a bad idea politically and electorally. But I think for it to be a betrayal, it must have been a betrayal under Boris Johnson, because the thing that people are focusing on today, from what I can gather, and rightfully so in a way, is the bad deal that the fishermen have got.
Yes,
and they have.
It's a very bad deal.
Because it's a rollover of the deal Boris Johnson did in the first place. So, admittedly, it's for 10 years. I think the government really wanted
12
it
years.
for 12 years, sorry. I think the government wanted it for 4 years, and they've obviously had to make concessions on that. I think they've recognised the concessions because they're putting, is it 260 or 360 million?
360 million. They're saying, it's interesting, they're saying we're taking, something like we're taking advantage of the opportunities of this by putting another 360 million of our taxpayers' money into it. Now, I would argue that if you do a deal and then you have to put your own money into it afterwards, that ain't a good deal.
Depends what money's coming in, I suppose. Are we going to reap any rewards out of growth? The number 10, I think, had said today, and we'll have to see if it bears fruit, that it'll put about 9 billion back into the economy.
I mean, that is 0.3% of what the country makes of GDP, and that by, 2040, something like that. So really, where are the benefits? What's in it for Britain? Can you see any benefit for Britain? I can't see a single benefit for Britain here.
Genuinely, I've seen it been laughed at, and I think I've seen some stuff online where actually it was going to happen anyway. But I think the e-gates thing, I know people laugh at it. People get annoyed by this sort of stuff. People that
that's not enough for all the stuff we've given away.
No, it probably isn't. However, this is the problem with Brexit, and this is why I struggle to talk about it, because I didn't care enough for the original referendum. Brexit means something to everybody, something totally different. So the idea that it's a betrayal of this or a betrayal of that, I think as far as I could see it in black and white, we voted to leave the European Union.
Yes.
And we have.
But so what today does, what is undeniable, is what today does is brings us closer to the position we were in the first place.
Yeah, so I think, I was talking about this earlier with somebody, we may be seceding elements of national sovereignty, and I can understand if that annoys people. The problem is with regards to the fishermen, if we are seceding sovereignty, or in other areas, if you look at the agri-food sector, we've actually become worse off for having that sovereignty. So taking those little bits back and having your cake a little bit as you're eating it will hopefully make us better off in the first place. It obviously,
I mean, many would say we failed to take advantage of the benefits of Brexit. We've never really had a government, even Boris Johnson, some would argue, and actually I would argue, that really have seen the opportunity of Brexit to be a sovereign nation. And now, I mean, they'll say the sausage wars are over, we can put processed meat back to the EU. But then if you want to follow up on the United States deal, for example, you're going to have exactly the same food standards as the EU. So you can't do that deal in a way that you could. That freedom to do these trade deals in that way has been taken away by all of this today. And I think that this is going to be fascinating electorally as well. There must be a load of Labour MPs, especially in red wall areas, that are terrified by this.
Do you know, weirdly, I spent the day in Westminster today before coming here. People aren't bothered, weirdly. I was quite surprised that there wouldn't be some nervousness.
Surely this is driving many people into the arms of Reform UK.
We'll find out. The PLP is happening right now, the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, and Keir Starmer's actually addressing it this evening, which tells you the sort of scrutiny he's under at the moment. I think there's more annoyance with the welfare reforms and the previous election results and the locals and in the Runcorn by-election, that people are more annoyed about at the moment.
It's all together, isn't it? They might be specifically annoyed about how badly Labour did 2 weeks ago in the council elections. You've been very, very straightforward and honest about that on the times that we've talked about. But can't they see that this is all linked? Can't they see that this is to do with the fact that 17.4 million people voted for Brexit? I wasn't one of them. I voted Remain. I've been very open about that. But I believe in democracy. Keir Starmer called for a second referendum, and now he is essentially doing what a second referendum would have done in many people's minds.
No, and listen, I don't think, believe it or not, people have their own views, I don't think this is a ploy to get us back in. I really don't. I think he's learnt his lesson. He'd be totally stupid to do so. And I think anything like that would probably have to put to the public, or at least a vote or whatever else, and that would be probably a generation off yet. But I think it's broader than that, and it's more nuanced than that. I think the areas where Labour are losing and the areas where Reform are also doing well are areas where Brexit did well. But I think part of that plays into actually quite an anti-establishment thing, because we have got ourselves, a bit similar to the Democrats in America in the last election, as the defenders of the status quo and the defenders of the establishment, which people don't feel is working for them. What we should be putting forward, because we're not just bleeding support to reform, we're losing far more, actually, when you look at the polling that Moore and Common did after the locals, to the Liberals and the Greens and the left-wing parties.
I'm sure that's a major issue for Starmer as well. But the establishment aspect, again, it comes back to Brexit. You see, you have a national referendum. You say to people, what do you want to happen? A majority of people say, we want you to leave the EU. Okay, as you correctly say, leave and remain mean different things to different people. But then you have a Prime Minister who is getting us closer to the EU for what I cannot see any benefit for Britain in any of this. Maybe we'll get a bit faster in e-gates. Well, loads of people can't even afford to go on holiday anymore because of the situation in the economy. So I just don't know what's in it for us. I can certainly see, look, Ursula von der Leyen will go back to Brussels and say, this is great, great deal, marvellous, very happy, all good for us. All the bureaucrats in Brussels will be very happy. I don't see rejoicing on the streets, even for the Remainers, saying, isn't this marvellous?
Well, no, the Remainers will want to go further, I'm sure, those sort of types of Remainers. I think the fact that we now get access to the armament fund that the EU have put together will actually be quite important, because war seems to be on the cusp in a lot of countries at the moment.
We're members of NATO.
Yeah, we are. But the thing is, even NATO feels quite unstable with Donald Trump as president, and America at the moment is not an ally that we can rely on. I feel like the EU potentially is when it comes to things like war.
I don't want British soldiers fighting under an EU flag, quite frankly. Mike's in Peterborough and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Mike, you're on with me and with Matthew Torbett as well, former Labour advisor. What would you like to say today, Mike?
Hiya. When I joined the Navy, my first time at sea was in the Cod War, when Iceland declared a 50-mile zone, exclusion zone, and they basically rammed our ships. And in the end, they won. And they did the right thing because their fishing stocks are the best in the world, right? Further down the line, at the end of my career, I was on a ship called the Bickington, and that was when we had a fish squadron, and we used to go around and do the ships, right, and check the nets and all that. We used to give the British ships hell and was very kind to the European ships. And it's not just Spaniards, and it's Dutch. And I remember we chased a German vessel right across the North Sea back to Germany, the Scours, which was fishing for herring at the time, and it was illegal. And when they got them, they turned. It was Prime Minister level. They turned around, took them back into dock, and they just took the nets off them.
Okay, yeah. Well, Mike, what do you think of the deal today? Is it fair to fishermen?
I think if I was a fisherman, I'd be crying. They have got one of the hardest jobs in the world, and we should be, as British people, we should be eating a lot more fish, and we don't. It's just I don't understand. I just really don't understand what he's done today. He's sold our country down the Swanee.
And went in with a position of saying we'll give you 4 years access, and came out with 12 years access. That to me, that is not a good negotiation.
Well, he hasn't negotiated anything well, has he, since he come in? I mean, look at how can you let Indians into the country and they're not going to pay their stamp?
Yeah.
And be given jobs and the bosses are beyond I don't know. Beyond belief,
it's not fair, is it? It's not fair, Mike.
Not fair on British people. And do you know, in Scotland they've got is Peterhead still the biggest white fishing port in Europe?
It's up there. I don't know if it's the top, but it's up there.
It's going to get hit. That they're going to hit them so bad. I mean, because they don't care what they take out of our waters. If I know I've been overseas. I've travelled the world. I've been overseas. I've been into countries like Spain, France. They're going on about the fish and the langoustines they're eating, and I'm going, well, they're coming from Britain. All that good stuff is coming from Britain. Should be going to our people.
I think a lot of people will feel very similar to you, Mike. Thank you for your thoughts today. And that frustration that Mike has, I mean, we have a load of different messages here from many people contacting us today. Leslie says, call out what Starmer has done to the UK today. He has destroyed our hard-fought for democracy. It is disgraceful. You would think that Starmer wants to get the sack looking at these recent trade deals, says Jade in Sheffield. Mick says, whilst the EU factory ships hoover up our fish, we must boycott French produce and Spanish holidays. I just want to take another call now from Paula in High Barnet. Paula, what's your thought on this? You're on with me and also with Matthew Torbett. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, this whole deal, I felt this morning when I heard it, this was about the arms. This is about the industry of the arms industry, and they wanted to get on that ship and get in, I guess, because they were denied, the French were blocking them.
Yeah.
And when I heard this morning, I thought, oh, this was his backdoor into getting that deal with the arms, because that's massive money. That's major money. Secondly,
you think that's what this is all about, Paula?
I personally, yes.
Okay, let me just hold that thought just for a second. I promise you I'll come back to you in a second, okay, Paula, but I just want to get the thoughts of Matthew Torbett on what Paula has just said there.
I think if we're always going to deal in arms, unfortunately. Not lots of us would rather never be at war with anybody. At the moment, we're getting a lot of arms and bombs and bullets and tanks from China. I think it would be much preferable, regardless of how much money, to get them from allies in the EU than be getting them from China, particularly as China is siding with Russia. That's unfortunately just the global economics of it.
Paula, what do you make of that?
Okay, at the end of the day, we don't want war. The country doesn't want war. Mm-hmm. But he's putting that ahead of what the people want, and also the people's well-being. I would say to the public, if this goes through, we need to be more at the forefront of supporting our farmers, supporting our fisheries. We need to look at when we're shopping for food.
Do you feel Keir Starmer is supporting British people?
No, I don't. I think he is a career politician. He's never laid out his plans before the election.
Well, he had a manifesto, Paula.
Sorry?
He had a manifesto. He did have a plan.
It wasn't very clear, because we didn't see a Labour. We didn't. And no disrespect to the gentleman with you, because I'm a fellow Northerner originally, and I love him to bits. However, we never saw one Labour MP come and canvass in our area whatsoever. No one's ever asked us. I can't even get hold of my MP in my area. Don't know. I know it's a guy. I just feel that we are being left to the side. Okay. And the other thing I would add, this whole incident that happened in the north of England in Southport, and I know it's taken a bit away. I'm going a bit.
No, that's okay. It's fine to make another point, Paula. Just go ahead.
I feel he is, and I've always wanted to say this. He took those people. He put his foot down. He said, right, anyone who gets out of order, they're going to go and they're going to be behind bars. This was his get back, because a lot of Northerners were voting against Labour. It was just, and also a lot of Northerners voted against Brexit, against remaining.
Yeah. Okay.
So I feel he has a little personal vendetta. He is a clone of Macron. I've got a French colleague, and she said those two are in cahoots.
He's certainly a bit taller anyway. Paula, thank you very much for your thoughts. Let me just put those finally to Matthew, and then we're going to move on, because there's loads to talk about today. But what do you make of what Paula's saying there?
Listen, I get people's frustration without sounding like the Prime Minister. I do get it. I'm frustrated with him.
Does he get it?
No, I don't think he does. I think he's an empty vessel. I've said this before. This is a man who's on strings from the Chief of Staff and otherwise. I think the problem for us, and we've got to own it, we're in government, the problem for us is this, for me, has come on the back of lies. Fishermen are in exactly the same position as they were when Brexit went through. This is the problem. It's Brexit that has caused fishermen to be worse off. They had a much better time of it in the EU, even though they felt hard done by, because they were told they could have access to 60% of EU waters. That turned out to be 25% in Boris Johnson's deal. And then we were told that they'd make, was it 120 million pounds more profit than what they were doing. They're making 64 million pounds a year losses. These people are, and the thing is we're picking up the pieces essentially. And the idea, the last final point, Mel Stride made me laugh this morning. Mel Stride said this morning he can't unpick Brexit, but to unpick something suggests that it's sort of neat and tidy. This is a mess of a deal. Regardless of who put it through, I think they were always going to struggle. No Brexit benefits. It's like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake, and this is where we are, unfortunately.
An arresting image there at the end. Matthew Torbett there, former Labour advisor. Thanks everybody who's been in touch. One person says, I can't wait to hear how much we have to pay back into the EU coffers. Can't imagine it'll be much less than the 9 billion we used to pay. Graham in Bushy says, following the EU deal, our shopping will not be cheaper in the same way that Labour claimed our electricity costs will be £300 lower a year. Sandra says, I reckon Gary Lineker has been warned by police. It's totally out of character for him to apologise. I hate him. Honestly, I'm not sure he's even apologised, Sandra. Apologies. I apologise to you. I don't think Gary Lineker has actually apologised. He says, I recognise that it's a thing that's annoyed people. On Peter Tatchel, Jason in the Lake District has been in touch to say, I'm the polar opposite to Peter Tatchel in almost every aspect, but I'm equally drawn towards him because I can only admire his integrity and bravery. It's terrifying to listen to him and hear about how the Metropolitan Police treated him. Tell me your thoughts on all the issues we're talking about today. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
The BBC should have stopped him when I said they should have stopped him, and then we wouldn't be in this bad situation. The BBC looks stupid. It looks like they're going to be without a star that they say they love to keep because they can't find anybody else. You know, they've made a massive blunder here, haven't they?
This is without another star, you mean? So this is another BBC
Well, you're the one
star.
that said the BBC don't know how to replace him. That's what you said. Those were your words, not mine.
I know, but you know, the BBC should have been tougher with him and with Hugh Edwards. So you mean you were proved right, Mike?
Yeah, thank you. That's all I needed to hear.
It's in the Sunday Times this morning. If you look on the front page, passport queues cut in EU deal. Now, I can imagine this being spun out by the Labour government going, oh, look, here we are. This is the benefit of what we're doing. So basically, British holidaymakers could face shorter airport queues this summer with negotiations on the verge of striking an agreement, i.e. you can use the gates. That's the whole idea. What I didn't realise, though, travellers coming from Europe into the UK can use gates.
Oh, yes,
but we can't.
No.
Why?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of people getting in touch about Peter Tatchel and about Gary Lineker as well. Paul says, Peter Tatchel must be the only person in the country who was surprised that police support the rights of Hamas supporters. Darrell said, this is disgraceful behaviour by the police. Hamas are a terrorist organisation who should not be supported by anyone. The Muslim religion is one of peace and any self-respecting Muslim would not support Hamas, says Darrell. Dorothy in East Kilbride, good afternoon. Fantastic interview with Peter Tatchel. Thank you, Dorothy. I would like to say his story was shocking, but sadly this is becoming commonplace. What is happening to our country and police force, asks Dorothy. Mike in Torquay says, what a shame about Lineker. How will he manage financially now? It's going to be so difficult for him, poor man. Michael, I'm sure you could do a bit of a whip round and send him the, I'm sure, many pounds that you would raise. Paul in Belfast says, Tatchel talks nonsense. No one calls for the release of hostages at the pro-Palestinian protest. Well, Peter Tatchel did. So listen, I take a much less charitable view of the people in the pro-Palestinian protests than Peter Tatchel does. There are clear support for prescribed terrorist organisations, Hamas and Hezbollah. So, Paul, I'm closer to you than I am to Peter Tatchel on this, but I'm not 100% with you, I'm afraid. Jane says, one less presenter in Gary Lineker to pay from the licence fee. He should keep to selling crisps. Perhaps he could lobby them to put more than one crisp in the bag, says Jane. And there's awful lot to get through and to talk about. Let's just remind ourselves what Gary Lineker said. I'm really interested in whether he actually said, I am sorry for tweeting the anti-Semitic trope of a rat in regard to Jewish people, which I just think is absolutely unforgivable. He said, "I recognise the error and upset caused." That's not an apology. Let's just remind ourselves what he said.
I've stood up for minorities and humanitarian issues and against all forms of racism all of my life, including, of course, anti-Semitism, which I absolutely abhor. There's no place for it and never should be. So I think it's best for all concerned that I step down from BBC presenting duties altogether and not do next season's FA Cup or World Cup. The final day of the Premier League season on Sunday will be my last show.
Well, Em Hilton is with us she's the co-founder of NAMOD UK and policy director at Diaspora Alliance, which is an international Jewish organisation that works to combat anti-Semitism and its politicisation. What is your view on Gary Lineker? Because I think people might find it quite an interesting one.
Well, the first thing I want to say is I think that this story really says a lot about the state of reporting in this country. You know, this is a day where over 50,000 people have been killed in Gaza. People are starving and eating weeds, according to an Israeli newspaper, because no aid is getting in, and over 65,000 people have been displaced. And yet we are here talking about an Instagram reel shared by a public figure. And I think that what is important about this...
hold on. With the greatest of respect, you've agreed to do this interview, and this programme... And this programme is talking about Gaza in depth on 2 other occasions over the 3 hours. I get your point generally in regard to the UK media, and certainly, but he is the best paid presenter at the BBC. He is someone who retweeted an anti-Semitic trope.
Absolutely. But what I want to say on this is that I think it speaks to the broader media and political climate when we are trying to have these kinds of conversations. You know, Gary Lineker has apologized and said that he made a mistake.
I'm not sure he has.
Sorry, can I finish what I'm going to say?
But I don't think he has apologized. I don't think you're right.
He has apologized. He also put a video out today on his social media.
When did he say I'm sorry? When did he say I'm terribly sorry?
He said, I have seen that he said, I apologize unreservedly for what I said. That was reported in The Guardian last week. But secondly, what I want to say on this is that as someone who works on addressing anti-Semitism for a living, as this is part of the work that I do, as someone who takes anti-Semitism very seriously, I find it very frustrating that we are also seeing the conflation and the attacks on people who speak out against Gaza, with this suggesting that they are posing a threat to Jewish people, that what they're doing is unforgivable. When we talk about anti-racism, one of the things we talk about is not only is being able to recognize and be confronted with when you have made a mistake. And I think Gary Lineker has said that he has made a mistake and said he apologized unreservedly. And we have to say, what do you do after that? And this is the question, right? People will make mistakes. Anti-racism and understanding anti-Semitism is a lifelong process.
Okay. Do you honestly believe it was a mistake to retweet something? I mean, a blind man like a galloping horse knows that associating rats with Jewish people is highly anti-Semitic. Gary Lineker has millions of followers on Twitter. He is someone who he can talk about the rights of...
I can't speak to the direct intentions of Gary Lineker. I understand that he deleted the video once he realized and apologized. I'm not in his head. I can't speak to him directly. What I can say is that this approach of simply punishing and cancelling people for making a mistake,
he hasn't been cancelled.
When they've owned up to it.
He hasn't been cancelled.
I mean, he lost his job.
And he's decided to step down.
Fine, not cancelled. He lost his job and has not been able to do the things that he's supposed to do because of this issue. What I would say is that I think it is actually not good for the struggle against anti-Semitism when there's clearly been disagreement between the BBC and Gary Lineker for a long time around his political positions and his, for example, what happened with Match of the Day last year around asylum seeker issues, and that using this excuse of anti-Semitism or this alleged or supposedly care for Jewish people to attack him is not helpful for us, because that makes it look like there is both a conspiracy or some kind of potential Jewish conspiracy sort of pushing this agenda.
What? That's nonsense. That's nonsense. I'm sorry.
Why is that nonsense?
It doesn't make it look like that at all. Calling out someone for anti-Semitism. He's someone who says that being silent is...
a public figure losing their job because of this, for making a mistake and having owned up for it.
It wasn't... look, we can debate whether it was a mistake or not a mistake. The fact is that he has consistently said that silence is complicity. On the 7th of October... Hold on. On the 7th of October, he tweeted nothing about what happened and what Hamas did. He tweeted about Spurs being top of the league. He was silent about the 7th of October. Then he tweets something about comparing rats to Jewish people. The evidence is stacking up here. I'm sorry.
I think that's a huge leap. And for starters, just to say,
it's not a huge leap at all.
My husband is Israeli, and we both knew people who were attacked on October 7th. This is something I take very seriously. I don't think we should be policing people's social media. There's lots of reasons why people either did or didn't say things on October 7th, including a lot of Jewish people, because we were trying to deal with what was happening to people that we cared about. So I'd just be very careful on that.
Well,
I think the idea that I think Gary Lineker has been an outspoken progressive activist on a lot of different issues, including Gaza, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that there are also targeted campaigns against people in the public eye who are speaking out, and particularly whether this issue of people saying things, for example, let me finish my point, people who do speak out on other issues or have been made certain problematic remarks in the past do not lose their jobs. And that is where that inconsistency can generate conspiracy theories about Jewish power.
I totally agree with you that it's completely inconsistent. But the problem is that the BBC is meant to be consistent. There's meant to be impartiality from BBC broadcasters, and on a number of occasions Gary Lineker has been told you need to dial down the opinions, you need to stick to being a football pundit, commentator and presenter, you need to stop talking about international issues because you're not being impartial. He has failed to do that on a number of occasions and has lost his job as a result.
Well, as I said, I'm not a sort of expert on policy at the BBC Broadcasting and Media. What I can say is that we are seeing a pattern of people who speak out on the issue of Palestine, on Gaza, over the last few years, of being silenced or attacked.
Who else has been silenced? Who else has been silenced?
We are seeing, for example, there was the Walt Disney character woman, the actress Rachel. Sorry, can't remember her surname, where the movie tagged, they said it was because she posted about Gaza. We saw someone fired from the show. The actress from Wednesday was fired from a production because she spoke out against Gaza. This is something that we see consistently.
Okay, those two things. You're referring to Rachel Zagler there, I think, and you're referring to two things in America. Can you think of any other British person who has lost their job or lost their position simply for...
we can see academics, for example. We saw a woman in Sheffield, at Sheffield Hallam University, who almost lost her job or her PhD.
Almost, but she didn't lose her job.
Position. It went to tribunal.
What I think we have seen on a number of occasions is the greatest examples of free speech in this country. I think there are loads of people who disagree with my position, who have free speech, and rightly so, who go on marches. I spoke to Peter Tatchel earlier on in the programme, who has his free speech, who had his free speech curbed. He was arrested for talking about someone who Hamas executed. And he was arrested by the Metropolitan Police. I can't think of a single person who has been cancelled simply because they're standing up for the very clear and very, very important issue, which we talked about a number of times in this programme already. We're going to continue to talk about it, about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. I get that. I understand that. I don't think that's why Gary Lineker has lost his job. I think he's lost his job because he tweeted something which was anti-Semitic. I also think that he has breached BBC guidelines on many, many occasions. That's what I think has happened.
I think to seriously suggest that there hasn't been a chilling effect in the public sphere around Gaza. I mean, I think even, for example, the previous... I mean, what do you mean, where?
Give me an example. Give me an example.
I mean, we're seeing the ways in which MPs have feeling unclear or unable to speak out on these issues.
How? There've been loads of debates. There was an urgent question in Parliament last Wednesday. I interviewed Shawkat Adam, one of the most pro-Palestinian MPs.
We also had these MPs who have been outspoken who were suspended from the party. The idea, I think that
that's not what they were suspended from the party about. That's not. They were not suspended. If you make a point,
but they are all outspoken on Gaza, right?
That's not why they're suspended from the party. You're conflating the issues.
We're seeing the ways in which academic. There has been chilling effects on academics on campus.
Where?
This is something that is very much...
Where has this happened?
We have seen this at multiple universities.
Where? Give me an example.
At UCL, at Manchester, we saw, for example, the forensic architecture exhibition at Manchester, which was taken down because it referenced colonialism in Palestine by forensic architecture after complaints. So there's an example number one.
What has colonialism in Palestine got to do with the humanitarian situation in Gaza?
That's a great question. You'd have to ask UK lawyers for Israel.
Okay, but
they were the ones who complained.
Okay, I'm not defending them. I'm not saying necessarily they've done the right thing. But the point is that those were not people who were talking about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. There are loads of people talking about it because it's a major, major issue, and I'm completely on the same page.
We are seeing, for example, the second thing we had, for example, with the Barbican Centre, where they were supposed to put on a talk by Pankaj Mishra, and it was cancelled because they were concerned about what he was going to say about Gaza. We are seeing these things happen. It had to be reorganised. There is a concern that people are afraid of being attacked for their position, are afraid of losing their jobs, are afraid of being accused of anti-Semitism. And that doesn't mean that sometimes anti-Semitism isn't part of that. It is. But we have to have a better way of understanding it that does not infringe on our free speech and does not infringe on our ability to speak out against Gaza. I think it's very clear that this example, I'm not a BBC expert. I don't even watch football. I don't really even know that much about it.
I don't either. I know nothing about football.
But it's very clear that he is someone who is outspoken about these issues, and that it is emblematic of a broader problem. And if the issue and the actual concern here is whether anti-Semitism is a problem in British society, is something we should take seriously, it would be great, for example, if we had more of the British media talking about the rise of far-right politics across Europe, for example, which is often motivated, almost always motivated, by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, by anti-Black racism. And this is something that doesn't get the airtime. At the same time, some of the ways in which the passive voice is used to talk about Gaza, the regurgitating of Israeli PR statements as reporting when and is not seen as sort of an example of anti-Palestinian racism when people are being literally murdered en masse at this time is disgraceful, and it creates a hierarchy of racism. This is another thing that contributes to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? Because it suggests that Jewish issues and Jewish racism is taken more seriously than others. That is damaging for the fight against anti-Semitism. It is damaging for Palestinian human rights, and it's damaging for democracy. We see the ways in which issues around anti-Semitism are being used to silence free speech and silence the right to protest. That doesn't mean it's okay to repost those videos. But we have to give Lineker some space to say, and grace to say, I'm sorry, he did apologize, and the question is what you do now. And we have to make sure that we are not putting Palestinian human rights and the fight against anti-Semitism in competition. And that is what is very dangerous about this moment.
Thank you. I vehemently disagree with so many things you've said, but I really enjoyed the conversation. I want to thank you for coming on, and please come in the studio the next time, because I'm absolutely serious. I'd love to talk to you a lot more, because I think you're a really interesting person who has a lot to say. And on my programme, we disagree without being disagreeable, and I hope we've done that today. And I really appreciate you coming on. Really interesting perspective, one I haven't heard before. That is M. Hilton there. He's a Jewish writer, co-founder of Namod UK and policy director at the Diaspora Alliance. That was kind of fascinating, actually. Really interesting. Jodie's nodding her head. What do you think about it? 0344 499 1000. In a second, we're going to talk to Michael Yaki, US political analyst and former senior advisor to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, because, of course, we were lied to about Joe Biden time and time again. Now, there's a new book out revealing how we were lied to about his cognitive function declining. Stay with us here on Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Here we go. We're back on the air, and Michael Yaki is in the studio. He's a US political analyst and former senior advisor to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. Michael, great to have you in the studio again. How are you doing?
I'm a little weirded out because it's a Monday, and so I thought when you called me, I thought, what happened to the whole rest of the week?
Yeah, I'm meant to be asleep at this stage. No, Jeremy's usually here, but I'm in for him for a couple of weeks. Lots happening in America. This new book, Original Sin, is coming out, and we were lied to about Joe Biden, weren't we?
We were, but you have to think about it. Is it really that extraordinary? And
it's not that surprising.
When you think about, and usually it does happen in a president's second term, right? No one knew about Reagan's Alzheimer's, and people did know about that early on in the second term. Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, and basically his wife Edith ran the country during that period of time. These things have happened, and it's part of what we in the U.S. have called the imperial presidency. Mm-hmm. It's like we're the palace guard, we protect him.
I think it's Schlesinger who coined that term in the first place.
Exactly, and there's such a premium on loyalty. The only difficulty, of course, is that this isn't an imperial presidency, because unlike, for example, King Charles, who is suffering from cancer, there's not an issue whether or not he has to make a decision about pushing the nuclear button, and that's the difference. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of people start thinking about, perhaps unofficially, but talking about putting age limits on when someone should go in office, because health things just happen. I mean, the latest thing about the prostate cancer is just another example.
Just to say, this is Joe Biden. He's been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Lots of people sending their good wishes. The King has written to him privately. We've had, of course, President Trump as well saying he wishes him well. That is, of course, a horrible thing to happen, and we wouldn't wish anything bad on Joe Biden, whether it's prostate cancer or cognitive decline. But the point is, with the cognitive decline, is that we could see it happening. We saw it in the debate, we saw it at various points, yet we had loads of different politicians, including Keir Starmer, actually saying, no, he's fine, it's all fine. And behind the scenes, it was a very, very different picture.
I mean, people... Like I said, it's about loyalty. It's about protection. It's
they were protecting themselves as well.
Exactly. I mean, yes and no. When you and I both been in this position, you develop a tremendous sense of loyalty to this person.
Yes.
They have given you lots of opportunities, and for these people, they have an amount of power that none of us can truly understand unless you've been in the West Wing. So yeah, there is some of that self-protection going on, but there's also, I think, at the core of it, protection of the person who is there. But at some point you have to make a decision. Is it the person or is it the country that my responsibility is to whom do I swear the oath of office?
Yes.
I don't swear it to Joe Biden, I swear it to the Constitution. And there were signs all over the place. We all know about the fact that he didn't do any press conferences. Everything he did was radio, everything he did was small market, everything he did was scripted. It doesn't take well, I shouldn't say brain surgeon, but it doesn't take someone much to think they must be doing something to prevent some things from occurring, namely freewheeling exchange, the idea that you would get a question and just do it. And then, of course, in that debate, you saw every single flaw, every single defect exposed massively.
And Trump didn't even have to really go for him, did he? Trump was very restrained and said in that debate, I'm not even sure, in a very calm voice, he said, I'm not even sure that Joe Biden knows what he's saying.
As you and I both know, sometimes the best answer is no answer. Let what's going on speak for itself. And what you see now is the Democrats engaging in a little circular firing squad going on. People who were his surrogates, who were out there saying he was fine, are now kind of saying, yeah, okay, I guess he was in decline, or they're saying, I didn't know, no one told me.
He didn't recognize George Clooney. He's one of the most recognizable people in the world. But yet George Clooney went ahead with a fundraiser raising $30 million for Joe Biden's re-election campaign. I mean, there's a number of people here who have questions to answer.
But that was at the fundraiser that this happened. And the next thing you know, he's writing an editorial for the New York Times saying, Joe's got to go. I mean, for the Democrats, the issue is going to be, Are we going to be talking about age limitations? Are we going to be saying, as much as we don't want to age discriminate, is there at some point in age that we decide it's just not worth any sort of risk? That you just look at the medical studies and where things can accelerate, because what the Democrats understand now, and they should have understood back then, is that Joe should never have been in the race. And having an open primary, having someone who had the ability to really take on Donald Trump other than Kamala Harris, or it might have been Kamala Harris who would have had the benefit of an entire campaign season.
But you would have had a lot more people like Gavin Newsom, the governor of...
Josh Shapiro, lots of Mark Kelly. There are a lot of people who would have been in the game. And primaries, as you know, have a tendency to sort of weed people out. And in 2019, Kamala Harris was weeded out really fast. So these are all the things that people are talking about. But it all comes down to one simple question. Is your loyalty to the person or to the office? And if it's to the office, you have an obligation to come forward or quit.
Trump has been speaking, the current President Trump has been speaking to Vladimir Putin as we've been on air, actually. That phone call has finished. We don't know what's in it, of course, but we do know that we were told it would focus on ending the bloodbath in Ukraine. The two men talking can't be necessarily seen as a bad thing, I would imagine. Do you think we're closer in regard to some form of resolution? Is Trump, clearly Trump is engaging with this. He wants it to work in some way.
Well, I think he wants it to work, but this is my disagreement with the president in terms of this. This isn't a situation where there are two sides to the story, and we've seen this flaw in the president before. You know, the two sides in Charlotte. They're very good people on both sides when it came to that racist protest in Virginia back in 2017. We know what happened in Ukraine. We know who attacked whom. We know what they're doing. We know from our own intelligence data where the atrocities have occurred. And to just sort of say, I'm going to be a neutral arbiter and I'm kind of sick and tired of both sides not trying to reach an agreement, well, that's not really that may be what, you know, a mediator may say in a divorce proceeding. The stakes on this are a lot higher. And the President of the United States has to recognize what his or her state presence is in order to sort of move the agenda forward. And that's where I'm not sure, just sort of saying, you know, Vlad, do you want to end this? You know, can we get somewhere going? It should be more about, you know, Vladimir, we have these issues with you, what you're doing. You just bombed the heck out of Kiev the day before we had this phone call. That's bad faith. I'm considering doing X, Y, and Z extra sanctions unless you start doing something. We haven't heard any of that. Instead, we just sort of hear a lot of talk about, well, he shouldn't do that, it's bad, and a lot of low expectation pre-inoculation going on before the call. Hopefully, I mean, but I would love to be surprised. I think all of us would love to be surprised.
We're told the pair spoke for more than 2 hours, and the call Putin has called informative, frank, and very useful, according to a Russian news agency. So we'll see what comes out of that. Michael, thank you. Thank you for coming in. Great to talk to you,
Peter.
About American politics, as always, and global politics as well. That's Michael Yaki there. He is a US political analyst, a former senior advisor to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She was, of course, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Thanks to everybody who has been in touch on the interview with M. Hilton. That was quite an interesting one. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really interesting interview. Chris in Brighton says, thanks for having M. Hilton on your show. I had not heard of her until now. What an interesting and articulate woman who made her points clearly and without screeching and getting hysterical. Something largely absent on all sides of this debate. It was a breath of fresh air having her on. More please, says Chris in Brighton. Brad in Cambridge, perhaps less charitable, says, I want to congratulate you. You worked really hard to get a word in edgeways with M. Hilton, says Brad. Thank you for that. And Cleo says, M is completely deluded. She comes across like a raving lunatic. I suggest you invite someone like Jake Wallace-Simons or Douglas Murray onto the show to hear an evidence-based perspective. I have interviewed them both. I like interviewing them both, but we have a variety of voices and a variety of perspectives, and that I hadn't heard previously. It was really fascinating. And Mick says she just threw as many words as possible at you. When challenged, she had no facts. There was a lack, I think, of backing up some of her assertions, but it was a very interesting conversation. Nonetheless, we're going to have more of those as the show goes on. 0344 499 1000. We're also going to get an update on the sport in just a second.
I very much doubt that Keir Starmer will be changed. I wanted a challenge to be made to Gordon Brown at the end of the last Labour government, and there appears to be no appetite ever within the Labour Party to change leaders. We're almost the exact opposite of the Conservatives, who change their leader at the drop of a hat. So I don't think that's going to happen. What I'm going to focus on is helping the government to make better decisions.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is
Thank you to Richard in Bristol, who says, I did not vote for this last year regarding the EU reset. Starmer hates our country, says Richard. Martin says, Martin here in Oxfordshire, the EU bottom dredging fishing fleet is the largest in the world. They're totally destructive, wrecking the sea bottom, removing all life from it. It is so destructive, a method that New Zealand has banned with specific reference to the EU. Paul says it's more than just catching fish, Peter. Fishing towns were thriving in the past because of tourism. Now ghost towns, generations of unemployed. Labour and the Tories sold these poor people down the Swanee many years ago. David in the Cotswolds says the Nazi Party used the cartoon metaphor of a rat in their propaganda to depict Jews. We all know that. No fast-talking activist can get away from that fact. Lineker would have known, or should have known, that given the context of what he was reposting. His repost should really find his liberty removed for a period, says David in the Cotswolds. Well, I'm certainly not advocating that Gary Lineker goes to prison for that, but he shouldn't have retweeted it. Sean in Norfolk says Lineker's social media post deleted, gets fired, and the chance to say goodbye, keeps pension. Lucy Connolly's social media post deleted, jailed for years. How can you say there's no two-tier justice, says Sean in Oxford. Sean in Bridlington, another Sean, says I'm going to boycott all EU products from now on, and I encourage anyone who cherishes democracy to do the same. Gustav has been in touch as well and says you should not be on any shows, Peter. People like you are always biased for Zionist, genocidal nations. Gary apologised and resigned. When are you going to apologise and resign? The answer to that is never. Right then, let's talk about the
Sport Summary on Talk.
Ian Danter is a Talk Sport commentator and is with us now. Ian, let's just pick up on Lineker leaving the BBC sooner than planned. What's your perspective on that?
Well, it seems that there are stringent rules when you work for the corporation about what you can and cannot say, and he's fallen afoul of those rules before. Funnily enough, I haven't even seen this tweet that was sent out that obviously has led to his decision to end his spell as BBC presenter a little earlier than he might have planned. But I just think it just shows on a more general level how careful everybody has to be with what they say, how they say it, and who they say it to. You know, the consequences of what is said, even in all innocence, as Gary has said, can be pretty far-reaching. So I think we all have to learn the lesson from this about being very careful about what we say.
Let's talk about football. Jamie Vardy ending his Leicester City career after his 200th goal for the club.
It's a fantastic way to sign off for Jamie. He is now largely considered to be Leicester's greatest ever player, surpassing actually the guy we've just been talking about in Gary Lineker. And he signed off at home with that 200th goal. So that's 500 appearances, 200 goals. So a record of, just over 1 in every 2 games is pretty fantastic. I remember seeing one of his early appearances, Peter, when he not long joined Leicester for £1 million, just £1 million.
Bargain.
From Fleet Town. An absolute bargain. And he played in a game against Hull City at the King Power. And it was 0-0, and it was a fairly unremarkable game, other than me watching Jamie Vardy being a pest all game. And I thought, well, there's something, in what was a very dull game, there's something about this guy. And within a year and a half, he's a Premier League title winner. It's a fantastic story. I only wish he could have stayed on as an international footballer a little bit longer. I think he retired from the international scene a little too soon, in my view.
Just briefly, because time is against us, but I did want to talk a little bit about Everton and Southampton. They, of course, marking their Goodison Park farewell with a simple win. But maybe we can look ahead tonight to Liverpool versus Brighton. Not a huge amount at stake. Of course, Liverpool have won the league, and well done to them. But what can we expect tonight?
Well, Brighton have a very specific set of results that have to happen between now and the end of the season if they're to nab a European spot, because Crystal Palace, their bitter rivals winning the FA Cup on Saturday, has made it more difficult for the Seagulls to get a European spot. A couple of results have already fallen into place, like Forest beating West Ham yesterday and Brentford losing to Fulham. So Brighton have got a win tonight, and then there's a whole slew of other results in sequence, including Chelsea having to win their Europa Conference League final next week against Betis for Brighton to somehow sneak into a European spot right at the last. It could happen, but I think it'll be quite an open game of football tonight. Liverpool, free and easy, title winners. Arne Slot's been to Ibiza for a bit of a party. He's come back. Let's see whether Brighton can get one of. They've got their best player, João Pedro, back tonight, Peter. So that could help Brighton quite a bit in their quest to at least hold up their end of the bargain and see what else happens.
Ian, thank you. That's Ian Danter there, TalkSport commentator. I appreciate you joining me on the programme this evening with the sports update. Lots to discuss. Do you know what? There's so many people getting in touch with us that we've actually decided not to interview a guest after the next news. We're going to go to a load of calls because there's a load of people who want to get on the air, and I want to get you on the air. So stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. Peter Cardwell here. Really interesting show this evening. Loads of people getting in touch, mainly on the EU reset. Someone, Gary Lineker as well, we'll talk about that. And Gaza. And Peter Tatchel, the human rights campaigner who was arrested for standing up for someone who had been murdered, a Palestinian in fact, who'd been murdered by Hamas. Really interesting thoughts. Keep them coming in. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember the main number does three things. You can ring me 0344 499 1000. You can send me a voice note via WhatsApp, less than a minute please, or you can send me a WhatsApp text message. Loads of ways of getting in touch. They're on the screen at the moment. If you're watching, if you're listening, well, you'll just have to remember what I just said. Loads to discuss here between now and 7. Stay with us here on Talk. John in Sutton is the first caller that I want to take this hour. In fact, we were meant to have a guest this hour, and I did say to Judy, our brilliant producer, I said, do you know what, with so many calls, we're going to have to drop the guest, because this is my show, but it's your show too, and the most important thing is to get the voice of the viewer and listener on this show. John's the first one this hour. John, you're very, very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'm really concerned now, Peter. I really am. From the body language and what I'm hearing and seeing, I'm really getting scared that they're going to get us into a shooting war with Russia. Starmer and Macron. We need to get rid of Starmer, because they're positively beaming that they've got a Prime Minister who'll put our military at their disposal.
Yes. Well,
I'm really concerned about it, Peter, honestly.
I mean, we're members of NATO, John, and we could get involved that way as well. This is really about selling arms and military, isn't it? I wonder what you think of that, and also what you think about the other elements of this deal, because very few people seem to be happy with it.
Well, personally, I think it's more about military integration. That's what I mean.
Okay.
Because, look, I'm all for helping Ukraine. I'm all for containing Russia. Don't get me wrong. You know, I'd arm Ukraine to the teeth, get them to sign a peace agreement and say, look, Russia, if you come out of that agreement, we will back Ukraine like they've never been backed before in your life. But what I'm concerned about, Peter, is the judgment of Macron and Starmer and putting British and French troops in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It could be catastrophic.
I agree with you, and I think we have to avoid that at all costs. Now, Putin and Trump are just off a call. We're told that that was frank and constructive. Do you think a deal can be done?
Well, I'm really hopeful for that. Yes, I do. I do. I think that Macron and Starmer might push it a little bit too far.
Well, we will see.
By putting British and French troops in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I'd like to for the peace agreement, a ceasefire, and Trump to be successful.
Okay.
But I just get the feeling that the European Union want to push it just that little bit further, and that could be crucial.
John, thanks for your thoughts. We'll see what happens with all of that. Matt's in Cheshire, and it's the second caller, 0344 499 1000. Matt, you're very welcome to the programme. I haven't chatted to you in a while, Matt. Are you well?
Yeah, I'm really well, Peter. Thank you very much.
Great. What would you like to say? No doubt you're delighted with what Keir Starmer has done today.
Kudos on dismantling the activist as well earlier on. That was excellent.
It was a bit strange. I actually really enjoyed the conversation, to be honest, but there weren't very many examples coming forth from what she was saying. But anyway.
You enjoyed it because you won hands down, that's right.
Sorry, Matt. Right, Matt, why did you ring us? Stop embarrassing me and make me laugh.
Yeah, I'm just rejoicing at the incremental sort of decline of Keir Starmer. As you know, I predicted he would be the most gutless and useless Prime Minister in the history of our nation. And I just wanted to add a few people to the list of people that hate him. We've got pensioners, anyone with an elderly relative, business owners, private schools and attendees, farmers, rural communities, fishermen, coastal communities, the disabled, most Brexiteers, anyone right of centre, and the left of the Labour Party. So my question will be to you, who in Britain doesn't despise Keir Starmer?
I mean, that's a very good question. I'm not sure I can answer it, to be honest. I think there are a lot of people upset with him. To govern is to choose. No Prime Minister is going to be universally popular. But listen, you're absolutely right, Matt, as you usually are, in saying that he's upset a heck of a lot of people. And what I don't see with this EU deal, and I would have loved to have spoken to the government this afternoon. We asked them to come on. They said no one was available. I would love to say, what is in this for Britain? I can see what's in this for Ursula von der Leyen. I can see that. That's really clear to me, Matt. What is in this for Britain? Why are we better off now than we were 24 hours ago? I'm just not sure.
It's not about Britain. It's about Kudos with his buddies, his globalist buddies. He's happy to sell us down the river to basically to impress the people that were flanking him today. But what he doesn't realise, in the long run, this will just create a Britain that's further right than he ever imagined.
I completely agree with you, and I think if I was Reform UK, I would say I would be really clear about how, and Richard Tice has talked to us earlier today, I think it was on Julia's programme earlier on today, or maybe with Mike. I saw it anyway, and he was saying, this is a betrayal, this shouldn't happen. Behind the scenes, I would imagine Reform UK have a slight smile on their face thinking, okay, we didn't want this to happen in any way, but at the same time, people will come running to us. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, Brexit's still alive. He's basically revitalised Brexit, and now the Brexit years look like we were all Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
So in the long term, we won't see Labour again for as long as we don't see the Conservatives. They're all on the road to nowhere.
Matt, great to talk to you as always. Thank you for that. The latest on the Putin-Trump call have been some more details have come in. The phone conversation's now ended. According to Russian state media, the pair spoke for more than 2 hours. Putin called it informative, frank and very useful. A ceasefire in the situation in Ukraine for a certain period of time is possible if appropriate agreements are reached, Vladimir Putin reportedly said. Russia's ready to work with Kyiv on a memorandum on a future peace treaty, and Russia's leading news agency has quoted the Russian president as saying, it also reported that Trump said Russia favours a peaceful resolution to the conflict, despite Moscow unilaterally launching the invasion and sending only low-level delegation of junior politicians to Friday's peace talks they were in. Of course, they happened in Turkey, I think, on Friday, if I remember correctly. And Putin is reported as saying that the root causes of the conflict must be eliminated, language the Russian leader often uses as code to mean the removal of Vladimir Zelensky and the installation of a Russian proxy government. There's lots to discuss in all of that. Lots of people getting in touch about Starmer as well, including Matt and Hove, who says if Starmer went into a bank to negotiate a loan of £12,000 payable over 12 months, he'd come out with £6,000 that's payable next week. The guy is a clown. Sean says Starmer is on the side of the EU and any other foreign country or entity. He hates the British people, but that's okay because we hate him even more. Goodness me, not a lot of love for Starmer this afternoon. Anne says, I should have asked my guest earlier why he didn't stand up for the Bibas family. I'm pretty sure Peter Tatchel has at various points talked about the Bibas family, who went through an absolutely horrendous trial, a horrendous set of circumstances with 3 members of their family being murdered by Hamas terrorists. We'll talk more about Gaza in a minute. Graham says, is Starmer trying to poach the Lib Dem voters with their EU realignment? Paul says, nothing in that agreement hits the EU negatively, but hits the UK with all the new freedoms we get ready to offer to the EU. It's win-win. Yes, France and Germany win. The EU wins. Hi Peter, on fishing, says another Peter, by international law our waters are the English Channel, so in effect it is a treasonous act by Starmer, says Peter in Croydon. I'm not sure he's going to be tried for treason, but a lot of people feeling very, very strongly in using that kind of language. Glyn says, utter and deliberate betrayal by our socialist government, and we did not vote for this at the last election. Another deliberate untruth by our Prime Minister. Another person says, where does Starmer think all this money is coming from? Apparently, we don't have enough to fund the winter fuel payments for pensioners. Unbelievable. He needs to go. One more before we go back to calls. E-Gates, says Vincent in North Yorkshire, not having to queue at airports if you're able to afford a holiday. Is that the best the EU can offer us? They will be laughing at us as they trough their champagne tonight, which we paid for. This is not just incompetence, this is by design. Great show, as always, says Vincent. Jason's in Sheffield and wants to talk about the EU deal. Jason, you're on the air. You're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
I'd like, about this. Well, it's not really a deal, is it? Let's be honest. It is what a lot of people are calling it, a surrender. The thing is, it's kind of all irrelevant, I think.
Why is it irrelevant?
Because if Labour's polling is as bad as it is now, or worse, in probably sometime at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, he will call. I can guarantee. I'm going to give you a Mike Graham prediction here. He'll call a second referendum if a Labour's polling is this bad. Pretty much.
I can't see that happening, Jason, but then I'm usually wrong.
Why not? Why couldn't you see that happening?
I just think it'd be totally politically toxic, and he said he wouldn't do it, but then changed his mind in the past, as we know. Jason, very interesting thoughts. Thank you for them. Let's go to Jan in Belfast. Jan, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, good afternoon, evening actually now, isn't it? I just wanted to make a comment about Keir Starmer. My big problem with him is I don't think he has any interest in what is going on here at all. I think his big interest is making himself out to be this grand world figure on the world stage, jetting here, making this agreement with this person, making this agreement with that person, having some kind of world presence as some sort of older statesman type figure, when in fact he can't string a sentence together, and he's so inarticulate in the things that he says and the way in which he says them that he can't even sort of be statesmanlike in the things in which he says. And I think until he gets off his high horse and realises that he's fighting for us and not the rest of the world, then we don't stand a chance.
Jan, thanks for your thoughts. Really appreciate those. Lots coming in on Gary Lineker as well, and Rashad has been in touch from London. You're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, yeah, I was regarding Gary Lineker.
Yeah.
I did see an interview that he had some time back, and it was regarding a similar thing. Obviously, there wasn't so much of an uproar at the time, but he was actually stating a lot of facts regarding October and previous. Like, he made it very clear, obviously, this political stuff didn't start on October, and he was very deliberate. He's a very educated man, and it's no coincidence. Like, remember, obviously, he has Walkers and all of these big advertisers, but BBC is predominantly his bread and butter since his football career, right?
Yeah.
So for him to jeopardize his pay, that pays for his family, we all know that he's not really short of money, but still for him to predominantly jeopardize that to make awareness and make us all speak again today. Obviously, everyone has their different views, but this has been an ongoing problem, you know. So what happened in October, it's not right, but it's bigger than that, you know. Also, what's happening today, you know, killing kids and women and stuff like that is also not right, but we don't talk about that so much.
Well, we have talked about it in this programme, and we're going to talk about it next, Rashad, so maybe you'll want to hear that. If you just stay with us for another few minutes, keep listening, we'll be going live to the Middle East and talk about that. Rashad, thank you. Andy in Cornwall says, Peter, thinking about the UK-EU reset, they used the courts to try and limit Le Pen's impact, and now the same happening in the UK by trade treaties with clauses as put in by our government. This is pure treachery. The government and civil service are pure traitors, says Andy in Cornwall. Brad says, just like Norway, we are now rule takers rather than rule breakers. How on earth can that ever be a good situation for a sovereign country? David says, perhaps we should have some backbone and allow Iceland's victory in the Icelandic fishing wars, says Dave in landlocked Coventry. Donna says, I've been out canvassing for the Reform UK today in Essex, and on the doorstep everybody is furious with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. They have had enough. Leslie says, how's it right that one man can overturn 17.4 million votes? Well, Leslie, he would say that he hasn't. He would say that Brexit's still in place. He says that we're not part of the customs union, there isn't freedom of movement, all those things. I would have loved to have spoken to Labour about this. We did speak to Matthew Torbett, of course, today, although he's pretty sceptical about Starmer, but the government said no, we'll see, we'll try them again tomorrow. We're going to try them every single day this week to see if someone will come on and tell us, just answer a really simple question, which is, why is this good for Britain? What do we get out of it? Thank you to Stephen in London, who says, in 40 plus years of voting, I've never known a government to willingly work against its citizens. This is so damaging to democracy, the home of democracy, the United Kingdom. Starmer, another person says, is out to destroy British farming, and today accomplished it. EU food and farming standards are lower than ours, so therefore food is cheaper. Many people don't care where their food comes from, as long as it's cheap. Coming from a farming family, I never thought I'd see this day. My heart has broken. Starmer broke it. James says Gary Lineker didn't lose his job, he gave up his job. That is factually correct. James says, someone please tell Sir Keir it's the French that surrender, not the British. Very amusing. Thank you. Another person says, Peter knows nothing about football, but you put him through the sport every day. Listen, that is true, but I also recognise that lots of people want to know about the sport, so I'm happy to do it. And very kindly, the top team behind the scenes helped me out and let me busk my way through it. It was actually quite funny. Recently, I don't know if you remember, Lucy Beresford is someone who's on this show very, very frequently. She's a broadcaster and psychotherapist, and there was once when the sport person said, we've all been talking about this. This has been, whatever it was, whatever topic it was, we've all been talking about this. It was a kind of open secret in sport. Everyone's talking about this today, and apparently I nodded my head sagely, and Lucy Beresford just texted me afterwards and just said you were sort of nodding your head as if you had a baldy notion what they were talking about, and of course I did not. Fern in Glasgow says, once Keir is kicked out, Reform can deliver the Brexit that the lying Tory party didn't deliver, a proper detachment from EU Brexit. On Gary Lineker, I'm going to take one more call. Tom's in Rugby, and we'll talk to everybody else a bit later on. There is another caller section later, but we've got to go to some guests in a minute or two. Let's speak to Tom in Rugby on your opinions. Tom, you're very welcome to the programme.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
I'm not really interested in sport at all. I don't think I've ever watched Match of the Day, but I enjoy your programme on Saturday morning, and now it's taken over by talkSport.
Yeah, no, we go to talkSport in the afternoons after my Saturday and Sunday programme.
These guys are fantastic. I have a clue what they're talking about, but they're so interesting and so knowledgeable. Who needs Gary Lineker?
Well, listen, I just think, as I often say, politics is showbiz for ugly people, and sport is, we are on the same floor, actually, as talkSport. We talk to them all the time, and they're our colleagues and friends. And I've learned so much being in this job about so many different things, but I learned loads about sport as well.
I really enjoy listening to them. You can tell them that.
I will, of course. As long as you keep listening to us, Tom, that's the main thing. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
appreciate that. We're going to talk more about Israel, Middle East and the situation in Gaza in a minute or two. We'll also talk about the Putin-Trump phone call. Sean Bell is a military analyst. He's going to talk to us about that and what we know, and lots of other perspectives coming your way as well. Loads of people getting in touch. Please do the same thing. 0344 499 1000. We'll get as many callers on the show between now and 7 o'clock. Kevin O'Sullivan's here between 7 and 10, and in the next 40 minutes, as I say, we're going to talk about the Middle East. We're also going to talk about whether prisoners could fill potholes and clean bins under government plans. What do you think about that? Would that be a better alternative than locking them up for short sentences? What do you think? 0344 499 1000.
The BBC should have stopped him when I said they should have stopped him, and then we wouldn't be in this bad situation. The BBC looks stupid. It looks like they're going to be without a star that they say they love to keep because they can't find anybody else. You know, they've made a massive blunder here, haven't they?
This is another star, you mean? So this is another BBC
Well, you're the one
star.
that said the BBC don't know how to replace him. That's what you said. Those were your words, not mine.
I know, but you know, the BBC should have been tougher with him and with you, Edwards. So you mean you were proved right, Mike?
Yeah, thank you. That's all I needed to hear.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Martin has been in touch from Oswestry. How do you pronounce it? Oswestry? I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry, my English geography is dreadful. Starmer is a very weak man and the EU are exploiting this, says Martin. Thank you to this person who says, how many times Lineker lost his job and keeps his pension for the same crime Lucy Connolly is serving time in prison for? That's not strictly accurate. Gary Lineker hasn't committed a crime. We're not accusing him of committing a crime and he would deny that. The point is that Lucy Connolly did commit a crime. She pleaded guilty to it. I think her sentence was far too harsh. She did incite violence. That's what she was found guilty of. I don't think she should have been sent to prison at all. I think she should have been given like a police caution or at the very most a suspended sentence. And there's still something we should be talking about. Her appeal, I think, is ongoing. I don't think we've had an outcome on that yet, but it's not the same as Gary Lineker. But thank you for that text anyway. Peter in Chatterton says, on Gary Lineker, his tweets have happened far too many times for it to be a mistake. He claims he didn't see the rat emoji. At the end of the day, it was anti-Semitic. Fiona says, your guest earlier, M, is doing the biggest disservice to British Jews. If she is supposed to be fighting anti-Semitism, I'm losing all hope of being Jewish here. She is fueling anti-Semitism. Well, I mean, she fights against it. I'm sure she would deny that. But listen, thank you for that perspective. And we have all perspectives here, including on the Middle East. And I can honestly say that I've been a strong supporter of Israel, certainly since the 7th of October, but I am really worried about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And Yoram Confino, who is Israel correspondent at the Daily Telegraph, is with me now. We're going to talk to Sean Bell in a second. Yoram, in terms of the humanitarian situation, it is desperate, but there are signs of perhaps aid coming in from Israel. Just bring us up to date on where things are.
So, hi, Peter, first of all. And yes, aid is coming into Gaza now. The first 5 trucks with humanitarian aid has entered Gaza today. It's a drop in the ocean, as the United Nations said, but nevertheless, this is the beginning of hopefully much more aid coming into Gaza. The decision was made by Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday to once and for all allow aid to come in because, as he said, Israel cannot afford diplomatically to have famine-like images coming out of Gaza, because if that happens, Israel will lose the support mainly from the United States to do what it really wants to do, which is to eradicate Hamas. So Israel has now come up with a plan for aid in cooperation with America, where an organization backed by the US will be distributing aid inside Gaza from about 4 different distribution points. And private American contractors will be on the ground to secure this aid, to make sure that it doesn't fall into the hands of Hamas, and to make sure that the aid workers are protected. Now, it has been criticized by the United Nations, by 22 foreign ministers around Europe, because the United Nations is not involved in this. I don't really understand what the problem is. We are yet to see if this plan works or not. We cannot already dismiss it just because the United Nations is not involved.
And also the United Nations, as we both know, has been under huge criticism for what UNRWA has done, the Refugee and Welfare Association that was meant, organisation that was meant to help many in Gaza. They, in fact, had at least a dozen of their members who were Hamas terrorists who took part on the 7th of October. So I am someone who is not convinced at all that the UN is the solution to every problem. And this plan, as you say, Yoram correctly, it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't been evaluated yet. So actually, if it does get aid to innocent Palestinian citizens who do need the aid, who do need to live and have some quality of life, at least food, well, that is something that the international community, I think, should welcome.
I really agree, and I think this is just yet another example of how blatantly anti-Israel a lot of countries in the world are, and of course the United Nations. Why on earth would you oppose aid coming into civilians just because you're not part of distributing the aid? You had 19 months to try and do it in an orderly way to make sure that Hamas didn't hijack it. You couldn't.
And that's the point in all this, isn't it? You're on the ground, you know this far better than I do, but Hamas stole so much aid that was meant for innocent people who've been through absolute hell as a result of Hamas's actions on the 7th of October and Israel's response to that.
Exactly. And this is something that's completely missing from this 19-month discussion about humanitarian aid. It is unacceptable, first of all, for Israel to allow aid to come in where its enemy that it's trying to fight, who's holding hostages, are looting that same aid. And it's unacceptable that they're taking aid from the civilians. But for some reason, the United Nations and many of these other countries, they don't care about that. It is not a very important issue for them. It's more important that they're involved with distributing aid than have Israel and the United States maybe successfully distributing aid. It is mind-blowing to me that it's been criticized so harshly before it's even put into action.
Final question, then I need to go to Sean Bell. Yoram, there have been proximity talks in recent days between Hamas and Israel. Are we any closer to getting the hostages back? Are we any closer to an end to this horrendous war?
I don't think right now we are, but as far as I understand right now, Donald Trump is putting so much pressure on Netanyahu to end the war that he needs to make a decision soon, either lose the United States as the best and most important ally at a very critical time, or end the war. So I believe that we're beginning to see the end of the war, but I don't think we should expect an announcement this week, for example, that the war has been ended.
Yoram, thank you as always. Good to talk to you again. Yoram Confino there, Israel correspondent for The Telegraph. Sean Bell, listening to that military analyst and former fighter pilot himself. Sean, really interestingly, I just think Israel has not done itself any favours in recent weeks in regard to its image worldwide. There are many innocent Palestinian civilians who need aid who haven't got it. Will this plan work, do you think?
Well, it's interesting, Peter, good evening to you, exactly what the plan entails. Frankly, Israel has sort of invaded northern Gaza a couple of times already, and if you do what you always did, you get what you always got. They haven't succeeded militarily to date. So it's not entirely clear to me as a military guy what the objective is. I think your previous guest hinted, though, at the idea here is that Netanyahu's coming under a lot of pressure now, particularly from President Trump. And I think what's happening is that Netanyahu's ramping up military pressure, forcing Hamas to negotiating table, because Hamas will be very worried, I suspect, that Netanyahu will just disregard America and come after them. And the only way that Netanyahu, therefore, can stop appearing weak is to go into those negotiations with Hamas believing that Israel will keep going and going hard. But because at the moment, although the aid, I do understand your previous guest's perspective, but I think it's around 200 to 500 truckloads of aid a day is required.
Yes, this is a drop in the ocean. As he said, it's a drop in the ocean of what those starving people need. I wonder, Sean, can you see, I mean, you're a military analyst, you're someone who knows far more about this than I do. Can you see a military objective here? What happens to Gaza after this war? Because Israel isn't even commenting on that. They're not going to trust Hamas to run it, for goodness sake. I don't think that's the correct outcome here, but I'm not sure what is. Do they have a plan?
Well, again, I think I've pretty consistently said as a military guy, you use military action to achieve political objectives. What are those political objectives? The only one stated by Netanyahu was originally to stop Hamas being a credible military force and stop them. People are now talking about eradicating Hamas. That's a shift in position. There's also been about freeing the hostages, but statistically, the only way the hostages get out is through negotiation. And at the moment, with 58 hostages apparently still left, potentially up to 23 of those alive, you have to look at the only way you're going to get those out is to actually stand and negotiate. So I do think there's a very blurred lines here. What is Netanyahu's objective? How much is this linked to his own political survival? And if you look at the bombing campaign that's happening in Gaza, it's very difficult to see how that is surgically striking Hamas. It just seems to be piling more and more misery onto the population of Gaza, and that is not going to bring an end to the war.
As someone who has been very vocal in support of Israel over the past 18 months since the 7th of October attacks, it's becoming increasingly difficult to defend what they're doing. I do think there's a humanitarian catastrophe and there needs to be a lot that happens. Let's just, before you go, Sean, I want to ask you in regard to the Putin and Trump phone call. That call has ended. Certainly, the two men speaking for 2 hours. That can't be seen as a bad thing. They're talking. There's dialogue. Diplomacy is occurring. Are we any closer, do you think, from what you've read or the initial lines we're getting out of this, in terms of them speaking for 2 hours? Putin said it's informative, frank and very useful. A ceasefire in the situation in Ukraine for a certain period of time is possible if appropriate agreements are reached, according to a Russian news agency quoting the Russian leader. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a bit of a cynic here, I'm afraid.
Just because you're cynical doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong, Sean.
No, but I'd love to be more positive about it. But unfortunately, at the moment, the harsh reality is that Russia is on the front foot on the battlefields. There's no reason for President Putin to stop the battle. In fact, by playing President Trump along, one of the things that even the press is talking about, that Trump will eventually lose interest and drift away. That will be strategic success for Putin. It's also no coincidence. It was about a week ago that you were commenting about the EU was saying if there isn't a ceasefire, that the whole mass of sanctions will be then put on Russia. I've been watching and listening. I've not seen any sense of that. And if you wanted any sense of how seriously Putin was taking this, by all accounts, Russian media say that he was actually at a music school in Sochi doing the telephone call. That actually demonstrates to me that he's no great incentive here to actually get involved in talks. He probably wants to play President Trump along, probably wants to buy a bit more time. The real question is here, what's President Trump going to do?
Sean, thank you. It'll be really interesting to see what happens both on the Ukraine question and on the Gaza question. Sean Bell, their military analyst and former fighter pilot. We heard from Yoram Confino, the Telegraph's man in Israel as well. Colin says, please remember Egypt has a border with Gaza. Why don't they send aid? And when did any other country at war send aid to the enemy, even the civilians? That's Colin there. Thank you for that. Anne says, a power voters have is to withdraw our purchases. If those suggesting EU goods had done 40 years ago as I did, we'd get somewhere. Angela says, I'm loving the new UK-EU deal. Well, it's 6:35. We finally found someone who likes it. Angela says, pet passports are back. It makes it easy to take my dogs on holiday to France. No rabies vaccine needed. No reams of paperwork. Just one simple pet passport as it was pre-Brexit. And yes, I voted Remain. And yes, I would again. But I also agree with Farage on net zero and trans ideology. So I'm one confused voter. I love the show. Always better when you're on, says Angela. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your thoughts on that. Lots to discuss still. Another story we haven't even touched this evening that we're going to talk about next with David Shipley, who's a prisoner justice commentator, former prisoner himself, is whether prisoners themselves could be used to fill potholes and clean bins under government plans. It's a really interesting thought, especially as our jails are basically full. What do we do with those prisoners? The jails, of course, shouldn't be full. We should have built more of them. But we'll talk to David about this in just a second. We'll get your views as well. Plenty of time for calls between now and 7. Kevin's coming up between 7 and 10. So stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks everybody for getting in touch today. Loads of people getting in touch, including this person who says, has anyone checked Starmer's birth certificate to see where he was born? Surely he cannot be British. I mean, he is British. He was born here. I know this person's got their tongue in their cheek. I'm not being a birther conspiracist like the Obama people. Everything he's doing is ruining our country that genuine British people care about. Another person says Starmer should resign after this. He's literally stuck two fingers up to the British people, and I know the King is not supposed to get involved in politics, but on this I think he should before Starmer ruins the country. Another person says regarding M calling herself Jewish and married to an Israeli, I mean, she is Jewish and she does fight against anti-Semitism. It's okay to have sympathy with what's going on in Gaza, but not even one mention of the hostages, 58 men and women held in captivity. Shame on her. Bring them home. Shalom. Well, listen, we will never forget those people who are there. I've interviewed people who are families of hostages. I know Emily Damari. I mean, I don't know her, but I know of her. Of course, I know her story. She is a massive hero of mine. The hostages need to be returned immediately, and this war maybe wouldn't immediately end, but it would be a lot closer to an end, and the Gazan people would be in much better shape in regard to their future. And the fact is that Hamas does not care about the Gazan people. It wants them to die because of their propaganda victory. It wants them to starve. It doesn't care about its own people. The tiny elite, it's not tiny, but the elite of Hamas look after itself, they loot the aid, and they let the civilians starve. And that's what Peter Tatchel was protesting about. It was a really good interview earlier on. He spoke some real sense there. I want to talk now about a story which is a proposal that criminals sentenced to less than a year behind bars could avoid jail by collecting bins and filling in potholes. Instead, the radical plans have been proposed to ease overcrowding in prisons as part of an independent review commissioned by the Labour Justice Secretary Shabnam Mahmood. And this is with the country's prisons overcrowded, of course. The review suggests magistrates and judges should consider more suspended or deferred sentence as well as community punishments. Doesn't this just exist already? David Shipley is a prisoner justice commentator, former prisoner himself. David, I mean, community service basically exists, doesn't it? Is this just saying that more of it should be there, or am I missing something here?
No, that's essentially the idea, Peter. Yeah, that what they're looking to do is make sure that if you would have got a sentence of less than 12 months, instead of that, the presumption will be that you go and do some kind of community service, which on the face of it is a good idea.
Short sentences, I mean, I used to work for the Ministry of Justice, as you know, as a special advisor to the former Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland. And short sentences are really controversial because people say, why would you go to prison for 3 months? Why would you go to prison for 6 months? All that happens is you're not going to be rehabilitated. It's not going to help you. It might even make you a more hardened criminal by the time you get out. But the point is that usually it takes a lot of crimes for someone to be sent to prison for a short time anyway. You've got to be, convicted of 200, shoplifting offences or whatever before they give you chance after chance after chance and then eventually have a custodial sentence. What do you think about short sentences, David? Do they work?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about all the problems of the short sentences. They don't really rehabilitate people. They have a very high reoffending rate. All of that's the case. Unfortunately, though, the question is, what do we do instead of that? You're absolutely right that most people on short sentences are prolific offenders. A lot of them have, really significant mental health and substance abuse issues as well, addictions, which are often driving their behaviour. A lot of these are people who do a regular petty theft or shoplifting. So we can't just let them keep doing that. We have to have some intervention which prevents them from shoplifting continuously, And the problem with the idea of doing community service is that these people with their complex needs and complex lives are not actually that easy to supervise. So it's a great idea if we could get people going out and fixing the roads, like picking up litter instead of going to jail. That could work really well. I think the challenge is going to be that the probation service are going to have to manage these guys. And actually, the probation service is on its knees. In many ways, it's in worse condition than the prison service. And I think while it's a good idea, my fear is it will run into the reality of a system that can't cope.
And the point is as well that it's not just about not having enough prisons, it's the whole system. It's magistrates' courts that are falling apart. It's backlogs of victims of rape waiting 3 years for a trial to happen. It's the prisons being full. It's the probation service, as you correctly say, being overwhelmed. There's so many elements to this. The whole thing is just broken. And this, to me, anyway, and you're the expert, David, but to me this just seems like tinkering.
Yeah, I think the sentencing review, which we'll announce in the next week or so, is going to be pretty radical, because it has to be, because they need to make sure fewer people are going to prison.
And this is the former Justice Secretary David Gauke who is doing that.
That's right. David Gauke will be presenting his findings in the next few days, I understand. And I think it will be radical, but as I said, I think the issue is, will the system be able to deliver it? In theory, if you have a system which is more about rehabilitation, more about community work, more about being supervised at home, that could work well. But it requires a probation service that functions, courts that are functioning and can deal with things quickly, police that can catch people, and even technology providers that work. Serco have had multiple issues in the last year about not tagging people. The system, I think, is going to really struggle unless they put significantly more funding into it.
I know exactly what you mean, David, and it's a big issue to which we will return, and no doubt we'll hear more from you on it as well, David. I certainly hope so. David Shipley, prison justice commentator, thank you for joining us on the programme this evening. Lots more calls to talk to people who have given me a call. There's still time to get on as well, as about 15 minutes of the programme left. I'm back all this week between 4 and 7, 0344 499 1000. So stay with us. More of your views coming up. And we'll hopefully get a little preview from Kevin O'Sullivan about what's coming up on his show between 7 and 10 as well.
It's in the Sunday Times this morning. If you look on the front page, passport queues cut in EU deal. Now, I can imagine this being spun out by the Labour government going, oh, look, here we are, this is a benefit of what we're doing. So basically, British holidaymakers could face shorter airport queues this summer with negotiations on the verge of striking an agreement, i.e. you can use the gates. That's the whole idea. What I didn't realise, though, travellers coming from Europe into the UK can use gates,
oh, yes,
but we can't.
No.
Why?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks everybody who's been in touch. Just been going through a few tweets here, and Bob says the aid will go straight into the hands of Hamas. Peter, Netanyahu will be doing this merely to appease the Israel haters. He knows that those who need the aid will not get it. Well, let's see what happens, Bob. Let's hope the people who actually need that aid, the innocent Palestinians caught up in all of this, get it. Mabel says, is there anything to stop Gary Lineker from commenting on football for other TV networks in the next few years? I'm suspicious that he went so easily. I hope his successor is not paid so much out of my money. I can't afford subscription services and pay the BBC £176 Well, Gary Lineker has a load of podcasts. He has a big company that he owns that has all sorts of podcasts, and certainly he'll continue to broadcast. There's no doubt about that, just not for the BBC. Another person says the establishment covered for Biden because Kamala Harris would have been worse, which is an interesting thought, although of course she then became the candidate. But yes, very, very interesting. That book, which is called Original Sin, is being launched, I think, tomorrow. Peter's in Dorset and has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Peter, I think it's Israel you want to talk about?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, hi.
Peter, good. Look, the situation, as far as I'm concerned, is that this whole conversation about Israel and genocide is a conversation which, period, is anti-Semitic. The situation is, and no one ever talks about what the British did at Dresden. How many people got killed compared with Dresden in the whole of the war in Gaza? The Israelis are called the Israel Defense Force. Yes?
Yeah, that's correct.
They do make mistakes. They've admitted they've made mistakes during this war.
They've lied about some of their mistakes as well. But the point is, Peter, I am about as pro-Israel as you can get on this, certainly since the 7th of October. But it is getting harder and harder and harder to stand. I will always stand with the Israeli people, always. What I find it really difficult to do is not criticise Netanyahu for what he is doing. There are loads of Gazan citizens who are completely innocent people who are being bombed and are losing their lives and starving, and that has to be avoided as much as possible.
I agree. But the situation is, as in all wars, which are horrific, and the amount of innocent people who get killed is horrific. And I certainly believe that it is also just as horrific what is going on in Gaza as any other war that's ever gone on.
No, I know you think that, Peter, and you know, Israel has to defend itself. It has to deal with Hamas. The question is, and we're probably not going to solve it during this phone conversation, but Peter, I suppose the question I ask many critics of Israel is, how would you deal with Hamas? How do you eradicate Hamas? How do you control them? How do you make sure that these murderous terrorists do not control Gaza and are a threat not only to their own people but to Israelis as well, as we saw on the 7th of October?
Well, I believe that the Israelis are doing what they have to eliminate the offence that has been coming out of Gaza for I don't know how many years to the whole of southern Israel, which no one ever hears about because it just doesn't make any news. And they've been given chance after chance after chance to do something about it. And it's so bad that Israel has had to develop its own
the Iron Dome, yeah, and I know what you're talking about there, and that is, listen, I have friends who have relatives in Israel, have told me about being in shelters. I've been to Israel, I've been to the West Bank, been to the Gaza border. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I am interested in it. And Peter, I get all that. I think I basically agree with you, but my point on the genocide point, I don't think that word should be used, and I also think it's untrue factually. But in terms of where Israel are now, they've got to find a way to end this. Hamas have to as well. Hamas are the problem here. But Israel it's getting harder and harder to say, why aren't you sending in aid? Why aren't you giving aid to people who need it? Why aren't you feeding starving children?
It's the people behind Hamas that have got to have the plug pulled out of them. And when people realise that, things will change, but the people who are holding the strings on Hamas are not buckling, and it moves into all the other areas of all the other offence that's going on around in the Middle East, and we all know who it's going back to, and that needs to be addressed.
Okay,
you've got to put the poison down where you've got the pest, and it's as simple as that.
Peter, thanks for your thoughts there. I appreciate that, and I think we largely agree, probably on about 80 to 90% of that. But I just think there's a wider question about so many people who've done nothing wrong who are caught up in this, and that is always the way in war. And I'll tell you something: if you don't think Israel care about them, Hamas absolutely couldn't give a fig about these people who are starving. They do not care. The larger the death toll, the happier they are, because it is a propaganda victory. In breaking news, Donald Trump says that Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations towards a ceasefire following his call with Vladimir Putin. It's unclear how this differs from negotiations that already began in Turkey on Friday. But this is interesting, and Donald Trump has said the Vatican, as represented by the Pope, has stated it would be very interested in hosting the negotiations. Let the process begin. He posted on Truth Social in a tone far more optimistic than Vladimir Putin's. He said the phone call went very well. The tone and spirit of the conversation were excellent. The conditions for that will be negotiated between the two parties, as it can only be, because they know details of a negotiation that nobody else would be aware of. So we will see what happens with all of that. That will no doubt be covered with Kevin O'Sullivan. Miranda's in Cumbria. Miranda, thanks for your patience. I know we've been trying to get you on for a while. You're now on. What would you like to say about Gary Lineker?
It was basically, he didn't really say sorry. And when he said it was an error is a mistake, such as a spelling mistake. And I just think the BBC should have immediately sacked him. But obviously their hierarchy isn't fit for purpose. And I just think that I was just truly shocked. Anybody else in any walk of life, even a woman on a plane who somebody filmed and she made a racist comment, she was sacked from her job. And I'm bemused and bewildered by the BBC. It just didn't say, you're out. You can't present any more programmes, such as Match of the Day. So he's going to make a big thing of it on Saturday or Sunday, whichever night he actually stopped.
Miranda, Miranda, I cannot disagree with a single word you've said there. And anybody else in any other job would have lost their job. But he was too big to fail. He was too big to fail.
It was, but they say that with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
And he has been totally irresponsible in doing what he tweeted, and it's just vile, absolutely vile. And the BBC are just despicable for allowing him to go out on his own volition, saying that his position was untenable. As Julia Hartley said, she wonders whether it was because he criticised the head of BBC Sport. But we'll never know, will we?
Yeah.
It's just wrong.
Miranda, thanks for your perspective. Really appreciate it, and certainly worth waiting for. I hope you felt it was worth waiting for to get in the air, Miranda. We tried to get her on a couple of times earlier and it didn't quite work because it's been such an incredibly busy show. Let's see if we can fit in Kevin in Norfolk before we speak to Kevin O'Sullivan. Kevin, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Peter. Great show. Really, really enjoying it.
Thank you.
Kevin, just a slightly less serious point. Has anyone noticed that Starmer touches people on the shoulder when he's having meetings? You remember?
There's a whole thing about that with Bill Clinton, isn't there? How he shook people's hands.
Yeah, that cringe-worthy meeting in the White House when he touched Donald Trump on the shoulder. He's doing it again with the European leaders. It reminds me of a young kid tugging at the mother's skirt. Saying,
it was. Do you know the worst one?
I'm here.
The worst one I ever saw, Kevin, was Nick Clegg and David Cameron when they did when they announced the coalition deal, and they were going in to Downing Street. They sort of talked and then they went in, and they just, my goodness, they kept touching each other. They wanted to be the last person to sort of touch them on the back or whatever to show they were great friends, and it's so ridiculous. In fact, David Cameron was once asked, "What's your favourite joke?" to which he replied, "Nick Clegg." I mean, it's so insincere. Anyway, Kevin, on a more serious note, are you as delighted as everybody else about this EU reset?
It's absolutely ridiculous. It's just, one of your callers said, yet another group of people that have been alienated by this government. And just on a serious note, I know you probably know the historian David Starkey.
I do indeed. I've met him. Great man.
A great man. And he asked one of his the people in the audience when he was giving a lecture. He said, "You know what a liberal democracy is?" And he defined it as where the elected government enact the will of the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So if you believe that this is a liberal democracy, then it should be enacting the will of the majority, which is stop illegal immigration, the winter fuel allowance, the no hikes in council tax. This government is clearly not enacting the will of the majority. And I think this is where reform are making so much progress. I'm 70, Peter. I've been a lifelong Labour supporter all my life, but not anymore. Could not support this.
On who are you veering towards another party?
I am. I cannot believe that I am. That my tick is going towards reform.
Yeah.
Because and the criticism they have about being racist, I can't find anything written or said that can in any way be subscribed as racist.
Mm-hmm.
As going back to my quote, they are trying to enact the will of the majority of people of the UK, and that's what they're trying to do. And to quote your mantra on the station here is that they're trying to follow common sense.
Yeah.
And that is what they are trying to do. And if we had more time, and I hope we get more time. My partner is a legal immigrant.
Okay, Kevin, we're just please ring me again, but we're just going to have to leave it there. I think you've had your say, which is